The young lady sat near the mirror and cleared her throat. She knew that she needed to speak soon. She knew she had to do this to protect everything she held dear. The young man shouted and told Antonia to stop right now. He grabbed her hand. Antonia looked at him with fury and told him to let go of her hand immediately. The young man shouted that she had misunderstood everything, since the girl had simply seduced him. Antonia looked at him with contempt. She was furious because she knew that he was making out with a servant and walking around the palace with her. She looked at her husband and said that they were getting a divorce. She said that she would not tolerate such things any longer. Her husband was furious in an instant. He rushed towards her in order to inflict injury. The young lady opened her eyes and breathed heavily. She was in shock because her head hurt very badly. She wondered if she had simply passed out. She looked around the room in bewilderment and realized that it looked like the maids had brought her here, but she still wondered why they didn't take her to her own room. But a moment later, she realized that she was in her childhood room. Sometime later, she hurriedly called the maid, who entered her room with a smile. Antonia didn't understand what Dora was doing in her room and why she looked so young. The young lady was perplexed and wondered if the maid hadn't been fired 10 years ago. Dora said with a smile that Antonia had asked for water to be brought, but she had already repeated many times that the lady could have done it herself. Dora said with a smile that she was mute, but her arms and legs were fine and she could do some things herself. Looking at the young lady, she asked if she needed anything else. Dora told the lady to give her peace. Dora asked her with a smile if she knew how hard it was to run back and forth. Antonia assumed it was just a dream, as she knew the maid had not been that young when she worked at the estate. She was puzzled because her whole body ached, and she wondered if she had been beaten while she was sleeping. Approaching the mirror, she saw her younger self. Antonia froze in bewilderment. She did not understand how this had happened. Antonia understood that if she was so little now, she would have to relive the most terrible period of her life. After her parents died in an accident, due to the shock, she lost the power of speech and the ability to experience any emotions. It was very difficult for her to come to her senses then, but now the realization came to her that she had died. She was in shock because she realized she had died when she was only 28 years old. She had always had a premonition that this was how it would end. Antonia, in turn, knew that now everything would be different. Since she did not want to repeat the mistakes anymore, she wanted to get back everything that belonged to her. She wanted to make them all pay for what they did to her. She stared at her reflection. She knew she had to make them pay for all her pain. Dora sighed heavily and said that at 12 years old, the lady could already take care of herself. Antonia knew that the maid was not doing her job properly, and since Antonia remained silent, Dora behaved terribly towards her. After being reborn, the young lady found out everything that happened in the mansion. She was glad that her uncle did not take control of everything. She already clearly knew those people who fully supported her uncle, and she also knew who remained loyal to her parents, no matter what, but they were still facing inevitable dismissal. She understood that this was not surprising, since they thought that she would always be mute. Her uncle had completely taken over the place of the heir, and she, who owned absolutely nothing, had to obey him. He threatened to marry her off to an 80-year-old man if she did not obey. The young lady knew that the old man had died as soon as she turned 18, and she knew that she should keep that thought in mind. After a while, Dora looked at her mistress in surprise. A moment later, she came up to her and asked if the lady was doing this for her. Antonia was shocked, as the maid always said strange things, but a moment later the maid took the lace from her. Dora smiled and said that such things only suited a beauty like her. She did not understand how the lady could simultaneously have a kind heart and good taste. Dora said that the young mistress was a very good person, but the young lady, in turn, was very angry, since something that belonged to her was taken from her. Antonia knew that the maid had taken not only the lace but also the jewels in this way, and at the same time she had boasted of all the things to the servants. The maid looked at her in bewilderment and asked if the mistress herself had really given her such expensive things. Dora looked at the maid with fury and asked if she suspected her of anything. The maid said that soon she would not be satisfied with all this. She froze. Dora said that she had no idea how faithfully and truly she served her mistress. Dora screamed that they were all rude to the mistress because she couldn't talk. She screamed that the mistress had a very kind heart. Dora shouted that she knew it better than anyone. The maids looked at her in bewilderment, as they did not understand her reaction. Antonia knew that the maid had managed to make everyone who suspected her of theft look like villains, But there were also those who did not fall for her tricks. Martina looked at the young lady and asked her to give a truthful answer to the question posed. Martina asked the mistress if she had really given the maid all the things. The young lady shook her head in protest. She never gave her things, and the maid took them herself. Martina smiled and asked the lady not to worry about anything, as she would sort it out herself. The young lady looked at Martin with a soft smile. She was glad that there was someone who could help her. A few days later, Dora said with a smile that Martina was fired because Martina dared to accuse Dora of lying. Dora was furious because she didn't understand how they dared call her a thief. She screamed that she was the only one who agreed to serve such an annoying person as the young lady. She came closer to her and saw that the young lady was shaking with fear. Dora smiled and said that she would take the ring as a token of compensation. Antonia was shocked because she realized that she would never see Martina again. Antonia realized that she was fired just because of her nod. She was in shock because she did not want this at all. She was shaking and crying because she understood that it was entirely her fault. But now she knew that she would certainly protect Martina and everyone else, no matter what it cost her. Dora entered the room and told the lady that she had brought her clothes. Dora looked at the lady with a smile and asked if she was really choosing jewelry to give her. Antonia was furious because she realized that the maid had become insolent and that she still had jewelry that was from her mother. She didn't want to part with them. A moment later, the maid grabbed the bracelet and said that she would take it. The maid smiled and thanked her mistress for the gift, and she said that for such generosity, she was willing to put up with anything. The young lady was in shock. She could not allow the maid to take what was left of her mother. She reached for the bracelet, but the maid looked at her mistress with a smirk. The maid said that she was right, and the mistress wanted to give it to her. She said with a smile that in that case, she would go and tell everyone how kind she was. The young lady was in shock, as she had very few things left from her mother. She could not allow something like this to happen. She wanted to stop the maid and take back what was rightfully hers. Sometime later, she ran to the place where the maids were and heard their conversation. Dora boasted to everyone that her mistress had given her a precious thing. The maids were surprised, but they knew that it was all because Dora cared about her. Dora said with a smile that she served her mistress without making a single mistake, and she could not neglect her kindness. A moment later, everyone present froze in bewilderment as they saw the lady. The young lady, in turn, slowly approached the maid. She was furious at what she heard. The maids looked at their mistress in bewilderment and asked why she had come. The maids asked if she had come because they had taken the Dora, but the young lady shook her head, thereby showing that this was not so. The young lady slowly walked up to the maid and took her hand. She looked at her intently. Dora looked at her mistress in bewilderment and called her, as she did not know what her mistress wanted from her. A moment later, the young lady collected her thoughts and, looking at the maid, said that it was her bracelet. Dora looked at her mistress in bewilderment and called her. She was shocked that her lady had spoken. The rest of those present looked at the young lady with tears in their eyes. They were glad to hear her voice again. The young lady understood that their reaction was completely normal, but now it was much more important for her to get her bracelet back. She looked at the maid and said that the bracelet was hers, and she had to give it back. The maid looked at Dora with anger and said that she said that the mistress herself gave it to him. The maid asked if she had lied. The young lady in turn knew that this looked like complete childishness, but she could not help it. She looked at the maid and told her to give her the bracelet. A moment later, Martina approached the young lady and put her arm around her shoulders. Thus, she wanted to support the lady. The young lady was grateful to Martina. Dora was furious. She did not understand why the lady spoke at such a moment. Dora knew that she should have listened to her and stayed in the room. Dora, in turn, knew that she still had a chance to get out of it, since the lady had simply said a few words. A moment later, the maid fell to her knees and cried out that this was unfair. The maid asked her mistress why she treated her like that, since Antonia herself nodded when she asked if she would give it to her. The young lady knew that this was how it would happen, but she wanted to pay her back in the same coin. The maid asked the mistress if she was blaming her just because she spilled water yesterday. All the maids were in shock. The maid said that she had already apologized for this on her knees, but nevertheless, she would return everything herself. Dora, with tears in her eyes, asked the mistress not to throw her out for such a minor offense. The young lady looked closely at the maid, as she saw that this performance was simply amazing. All the maids took their friend's side and told their mistress that she had served her well. The young lady, in turn, knew that the maids were all in league with her uncle, and she saw the vile expressions on their faces. Antonia told Dora that every time she opened her mouth, nothing but lies came out. Dora was shocked because she did not expect the young lady to speak. She shouted, "Madam!" that she had deliberately deceived her. Dora screamed that she was pretending not to be able to speak. The lady sighed and said that the maid was not worth talking to. The maid would have liked to object, but the young lady slapped her in the face. Everyone present was shocked and shouted that she was going too far. The young lady sighed heavily, as she knew that she was not very strong right now because her body was too weak. The young lady asked angrily if they thought she was so thin because she was sick. Antonia said that the maid brought her food once a day and used her things. She looked at everyone present and said that she had never given Dora anything. Martina looked at the young lady in bewilderment and asked if this was true. Martina screamed angrily at the maid that she had not done her job and was stealing. The maid screamed that she was wrong and had just hurt herself. She begged the lady not to throw her out and said that this would never happen again. The young lady angrily told the maid to clean up. Dora looked at her mistress in bewilderment. A moment later, Antonia told the maid to get out of her house. The maid stood there in bewilderment. She looked at everyone present, but there was no reaction. A moment later, she told them to call Mrs. Mills. The young lady looked at the maid in bewilderment, as Dora thought that something would change if the head maid came here. Antonia looked at her and asked if she had forgotten that this was her estate. Dora screamed that she couldn't just leave. She was in shock from everything that was happening. Antonia looked at Martina, as her voice was already at its limit. She told Martina to throw the maid out of the estate. The servants grabbed the maid, but Dora resisted and shouted, "Madam, she cannot do this to her." Martina looked at the maid with fury and told them to take her away quickly before her mistress got worse. The lady knew she had fired the maid faster than she expected, but now she needed to re-establish her authority. Martina looked at the young lady who was feeling ill in bewilderment. She caught the lady and she thanked her. Everyone present looked at the young lady with tears in their eyes. They understood that they had been foolish to trust the maid. The servants surrounded their mistress and, with tears in their eyes, said that now they would serve her faithfully. The young lady was surprised, as she had only thrown out the maid, but she felt she had achieved more. She knew she needed to sort this out as quickly as possible, but she was feeling very bad. Antonia was losing consciousness and seeing servants shouting at her. Mrs. Mills looked at the lady and with a smile said that she was already awake. The lady knew that her reputation had suffered after this incident. She looked at the young lady with fury and said that if she continued in the same spirit, many problems would arise. The young lady looked at her in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about. The young lady was told by the missus that she had thrown out the maid without her permission. Martina asked why the lady should ask her permission. The lady said that she should consult with her, since she was in charge of the estate. The lady shouted that it was her duty to manage the servants, but the young lady did not let her finish and told her to resign. The head maid looked at the young lady in bewilderment. Antonia asked if she hadn't heard. Antonia looked hard at the head maid and said that if she didn't like something, she could just quit. The young lady looked at the maid and asked if she could hear her. The maid froze in bewilderment. Antonia said that this was her estate, and also asked the maid if she really thought that her voice was more important. The young lady asked if the maid's problems were more important than her well-being. The maid realized her mistake and, falling on her knees, begged her mistress for forgiveness. She was in shock and did not understand why the lady had changed so much. The maid noticed that she no longer looked like a little girl, and it seemed to her that she was now talking to an adult, aristocratic lady. Martina asked the lady if she was okay. The young lady said she felt dizzy. Martina yelled at the maid and told her to leave the room immediately. The maid told the lady not to forget that her keeper was Mr. Paolo, and he had entrusted her with the management of the estate. The young lady, in turn, wondered why the head maid took her words seriously. For a moment she indulged in memories, as she had often been punished after her recovery. Dora made many mistakes, and they blamed the young lady for them. They said that she tried for her sake. The head maid locked her in and told the young lady to think about it carefully. The shortest punishment was 12 hours, the longest a week. In the damp and cold cellar, she sat for hours on end. She was afraid that she might be bitten by rats, but she still endured everything. Martina asked the lady if she felt any pain anywhere. She said that she would rather sleep now. The young lady, in turn, understood that she first needed to restore her strength and then punish all those who had offended her. Martina told the young lady to get some sleep. Antonia agreed with her. Martina smiled and told her not to worry about anything, and that when she woke up, there would be a delicious dinner waiting for her. The young lady thanked Martina for her concern, but she was still in her own thoughts. She knew that when she woke up, she needed to think about economic power. Sometime later, the young lady ate the food prepared with care, with appetite. Antonia was glad that Martina had taken her upset stomach into account and had skillfully prepared the meat. She saw that all the food was adapted for her. She had never eaten such food since the death of her parents. The young lady, in turn, saw that the maids took very good care of her. She understood that she still shouldn't behave as before. Antonia knew that she would no longer remain silent. Martina looked at the lady and told her to eat more slowly, and that she also needed to go to the doctor. The maids were shocked and couldn't understand how Dora dared to force her mistress to starve. Martina looked at the young lady and told her to tell her what she wanted to eat. Martina said that she would definitely do anything. She said that for the past 2 years, she didn't know what she should do. She remembered the moment when her parents were still alive. Her mother even scolded her. Then she had to eat only stew with cream, or her father laughed with joy. The young lady thanked Martina and said that she really missed her food. She said that she really liked everything she cooked, and she was still wondering how Martina had prepared it all. The maids were shocked that their flour, which they had cared for so carefully, was being treated so rudely. Martina smiled and said that, of course, it was a pleasure for her to cook for her. She said she was glad she could cook something for her. The young lady thought that sounded wonderful. She thought that after her ex-husband's strict diet, cooking irritated everyone. The young lady, in turn, thought that Martina wanted to create a meal schedule. Antonia said she should pay more attention to this too. Martina smiled tenderly and said that she would do whatever the lady wanted. The young lady was strolling leisurely on a fine day and noticed that the atmosphere of the estate had changed greatly. She knew she had worked very hard since waking up, but she still felt she should put on a small smile. Antonia understood that she could not always be like this. Before her death, nothing made her laugh. Antonia recalled that her ex-husband often told her that she had no feelings, and she then thought it was her fault. The maid told her mistress that staying in the wind was dangerous to her health and that she had better go back. The young lady, in turn, saw that she was now surrounded by people who sincerely cared about her. The young lady slowly devoured the delicious food that had been prepared for her with care. Martina looked at her in surprise and asked why she ate like that. The lady said that she had already forgotten how delicious it was. Martina said that she should eat slowly so that her stomach wouldn't get sick. The young lady, in turn, was grateful to Martina for telling her to see the doctor, as he helped her a lot. In her past life, after her parents died, she never liked all the pompous luxury. She knew that her uncle, who just wanted to show off in public, was trying hard to teach her to be obedient. After he became a count, one always had to listen to him boast about how well he had raised her. But unfortunately, her uncle did not fulfill his dream, as, after the dark days, the title of count passed to her. The head maid entered the room and told the lady that she had something to tell her. The head maid asked Martina why she allowed Milady to eat meat, since she now looked beautiful and slim. Martina said angrily that this was just nonsense, and that she was not slim because all you could see were her bones. The maid said it was all for the lady's well-being. Martina asked why she couldn't deal with other problems then. The head maid was furious and rushed to the young lady and told her that she should not listen to such things. The young lady asked in bewilderment why she thought so. Antonia said that she had just finished eating and the food was just great. She asked why she shouldn't have eaten it. The young lady asked the maid why she was taking such liberties and why she was shouting at her. Antonia said that her uncle was a big man, and she was small and slender. She asked why her uncle was so big. The head maid hesitated, not knowing what to answer. She was burning with anger. The head maid looked at the young lady intently. She was furious and did not understand why she had changed so much. The head maid looked at the young lady eating through gritted teeth. She was infuriating her. The maid approached her mistress with a smile and said that today's dessert was her favorite sorbet. The head maid wanted to object, but stopped because she understood that if she said anything, the lady would start to find fault. She didn't even know what she should say in this situation. The young lady, in turn, knew the simple and obvious reason why the maid came to her. Antonia looked at her and asked if she really wanted to say something. The maid said that the lady should choose a servant. The young lady asked if something was wrong, and the maid said that the kitchen servants had their own duties. Everyone present looked at them and said that they were not at all against serving the young lady, and that it was a pleasure for them. The head maid said that it was simply impossible, since they did not know how to properly look after a noble lady. The head maid told the young lady to look and choose a candidate from the list. She smiled and said that all the candidates for the position were smart and hardworking. The lady told the head maid that she had said something similar about Dora. The maid hesitated and said that these people were completely different. The maid called the young lady, as she saw that she had started eating again. Antonia asked if she really had to choose a maid, and the maid said that of course she had to do so. Antonia smiled and said that she liked Lorena. The maid was surprised. The young lady, looking at the maid, said that the maid was about the same age as her and worked in the estate. The head maid was shocked and tried to object, but the young lady did not understand the reason. The maid said that the girl only did housework and she never served a lady. Antonia smiled, looking at the head maid, and said that the girl could still learn. The maid was furious. Antonia said that Martina could teach her a lot. Martina, in turn, agreed with the lady. The maid shouted that Martina had worked in the kitchen all her life. The young lady said that she had braided her hair and picked out a beautiful dress. Antonia said that her outfits were previously dull, but Martina made them much better. Antonia said that the mayor of Tina Ranch worked for her mother and also for the marquis, and she could train the maid. The head maid hesitated, not knowing what to answer. The young lady said that she manages this estate. Antonio asked if she didn't know this information. The maid hesitated and said that she didn't know. Antonia said that the sous chef invited from the Marquise family after her mother's wedding was also a servant. She asked the maid if she knew this. Antonia asked if she really didn't know this information. Antonia knew that she didn't know it and wanted to kick them all out. Antonia looked at the maid and said that for this reason, she did not know that her servant was a thief. Antonia asked the maid how she knew that the people on the list were not like that. The maid said that they would serve her faithfully because she had selected them herself. Antonia asked if it wasn't the same with Dora. The maid hesitated, not knowing what to answer. Antonia turned to Martina and said that she would go and get some rest. Martina smiled and said that she needed to be careful about her sleep. Antonia looked at the head maid and said that Martina was teaching her everything and asked her to bring the girl to her. Antonia, in turn, knew that the head maid would soon be completely exhausted. The maid was furious and trembling. She could not object to the young lady, but still did not understand how she dared to speak to her like that. The head maid slammed the table in anger, knowing that she was the only one Sir Paul trusted. The maid knew that the lady had to obey her, and did not understand why she was asking awkward questions. The maid was furious and wanted to throw the young lady into the basement to punish her, but she knew she shouldn't do that because the boss would make a fuss. She understood that, until the end of the reconstruction of the estate, she needed to somehow shut the young lady's mouth in order to gain complete control over the estate. The lady knew that she would then be able to punish the girl thoroughly. While Sir Paul was still not there, she was very nervous. She didn't know when he would return, as she had sent the letter a week ago, but there was no answer. She wanted to send another letter and tell how arrogant the lady was. She wanted to tell him about the humiliation she had to endure. She knew that when he returned, the lady would pay her for everything. The maid knew that Sir Paul had not promised her anything, but she was sure that he liked her, since last time he had given her a necklace. She knew that to win the title of countess in his heart, she had to be sensitive. The maid smiled and woke up the young lady. She said that she couldn't sleep for so long. Another maid smiled and said that today, the chef made pasta with tomatoes and bacon. Antonia asked if it was true. The maid smiled and said that everything was exactly like that and she needed to get ready. Antonia asked if they had done what she asked. The maid said that she had already given the message to Mr. Roeder, and no one knew about it. The lady said that this was very good, because if the head maid found out that she had written a letter to her uncle, there would be trouble. She had been keeping the head maid on edge for the past 2 weeks, knowing they couldn't just send a letter. Antonia knew that the head maid might have read something. The maid said that the head maid intercepted household letters. The maid said that she had once sent a letter secretly, but Dora still managed to read it. Antonia said that Mr. Roeder was rude and stupid, and the maid found him difficult to deal with. The maid began to complain about the head maid and told her about all her machinations. Antonia said that they had all suffered enough. The maid smiled and told the young lady that everything was fine and that they were with her now, and Antonia was glad about that. She knew that she had maids in the estate and in the kitchen, and that the keeper of the balance, the head chef, was on her side. But she still knew that most of the servants served her uncle and the head maid. She wanted to create a quarrel between her uncle and the head maid in order to restore economic power. She wanted to use Mrs. Mills to achieve her goal, and after their time, she would appear in all her glory. The young lady sat and slowly wrote a letter to her uncle, saying that if it weren't for him, the house would be in complete disarray. She thanked him for his care. She wrote that she now eats 3 times a day and lives without worries. The young lady, in turn, wanted to appear to him as a naive and good-natured niece. She also wrote that the head maid takes very good care of her and is friendly, unlike Dora. Antonia wrote that she was still worried about her uncle, but also asked to believe her. She knew there was no hidden agenda in the letter, and if it were out of tone, she could get his attention. She knew he wanted to use her, and in this situation, her words would carry great weight. The young lady told the maid to remember to bring food to Mr. Roeder sometimes, and from now on, she would send letters regularly. The maid smiled and said that she would certainly do everything, and the young lady could simply trust her. The young lady, in turn, wanted to prove to her uncle that she was a weak niece and that she lacked his love. The head maid was furious when she read the letter, as the gentleman wrote that his niece was still young and a little frivolous. The maid was furious because she described in detail all the atrocities of my lady. She realized that something was wrong here. She was furious and couldn't understand how they could treat her like that. She knew that she would certainly become a countess, and she did not want to lose her dignity at all. The maid thought she had written too emotional a letter. She thought there were many ladies like her who Paul liked. She wondered what she should do if she wanted to use evil intentions for good. She searched for aristocratic paintings and books and magazines in the capital, after which she felt like a real countess. Some time later, the maid burst into her office screaming, and the maid asked in bewilderment what had happened, because she said earlier that you need to knock before entering her office. The head maid sighed heavily and told the maid to say what was the matter. The maid said that there was a woman in the dressing room, and she had brought with her many tailors. The head maid was perplexed. She thought that the count wanted to surprise her soon, but a moment later, the maid said that Milady had called her. The head maid was furious and didn't understand what was going on. The head maid wondered if the young lady wanted to spend money without her permission. The young lady smiled and told Antonia that they had not seen each other for a long time. She said that she was very worried when the maids bought her clothes. Antonio said that she hadn't had time to shop lately, and thanked the young lady for coming. The young lady looked at Antonia in bewilderment. She saw that her body was very thin. The lady thought that Antonia's relatives had forgotten about her. She said with a smile that they could now look at the catalog. A moment later, the head maid burst into the room and called the young lady. She angrily asked why no one had said that they had invited a tailor, as they should have asked her permission. Antonia looked closely at the head maid, as she had not changed at all. She knew that the young lady was known for spreading rumors, and that this incident would become public knowledge very quickly. Antonia saw her eyes, which were full of curiosity, just the kind that collects all the news around. Mills said Mr. Paul had entrusted her with the management of the estate and my lady, including the management of the property. She said that if Antonia continued to spend money on unnecessary things, the estate's budget would suffer. Antonia, in turn, felt that on the part of the head maid, there was only detachment and anger, and not a drop of respect for her. Antonia told the head maid that she understood everything, but she should still calm down, since they had strangers in the house. Antonia was now to her the girl who had gotten involved with the wrong butler and was depressed. Antonia looked at the young lady and, apologizing for wasting her time, asked if she could wait a little. The young lady smiled and said that of course she would wait while she sewed her outfit. Antonia told the maid to take the young lady to the reception room. The head maid asked the lady if she wanted to admit her mistake to the tailor. The head maid said that the lady should thank her. Antonia asked in bewilderment what she meant by that. Antonia said that she was only the count's housewife and must restrain herself from her impolite behavior. The maid was furious and asked what nonsense she was talking about. She did not understand why the lady did not want to admit her mistakes. She shouted that Count Polo was in charge of everything, and she, in turn, begged him not to spend the entire estate budget. The maid told the lady that she probably didn't know but the Count said that the property had to be managed thoughtfully and carefully. The head maid said that this concerned my lady directly, and that luxury was not welcome. Antonia asked if her uncle had really said that, and the maid said that it was so, despite the fact that she owned the estate. Antonia asked angrily if she took responsibility for her words. The maid said that she was sure of her words. Antonia told the maid that she probably didn't know, but the budget could be increased if necessary, especially for a child. She said that everyone knows about savings, but nobles must maintain their dignity. The maid was furious. She told the lady that if she didn't believe her, she could ask her uncle. Antonia asked if she herself had not said that she had called the man into the dressing room without permission, and the maid said that it was all true. Antonia said that she could look at the letter from her uncle, and she would like it very much. The maid was shocked because she did not understand why the Count himself did not tell her about anything. Antonia said that she asked her uncle for permission because she said she needed new clothes. The maid read in the letter that she could choose any outfits she wanted. She was shocked. Antonia looked at the head maid and asked if she had anything else to say. The maid was perplexed. Antonia said that if the lady wants to say something, she listens to her carefully. The head maid said there was a misunderstanding, and she was furious. Antonia said she hoped that in the future, she would not be so reckless in framing her uncle. The head maid was furious. She didn't understand why she had to be patient now. She knew that Milady's keeper was still there, and Paul had not yet received the bill. It knew that there was no deviating from their grand plan. The maid knew that she would soon become a noblewoman and live a noble life, and she just needed to be patient a little. She knew that she had been working hard all this time, and that she would be rewarded for everything. The maid sighed heavily, looking at the lady. She said that the lady was in excellent condition. The maid said that Paula was very careful with her. The young lady smiled and said that it was all thanks to the two of them. And the maid said that it was a great honor for them. Antonia said they both worked hard to avoid being noticed by the head maid. Antonia used all possible means. She asked a reliable person, and he took the letter. She knew that the head maid was guarding the estate, and it was not easy. She told Polly that she was pretending to be modest. Polly said that the head maid was very naive, and they managed. The maid asked the young lady if she had everything under control. Antonia looked at her in bewilderment. The maid asked what she would do when her uncle returned, as they were very worried that their mistress might get hurt. Antonia said that they need not worry about her uncle, as she had thought everything through. The head maid smiled and said that she was very glad and hoped that everything would be okay. She said that she still needed to pick up her dresses, and asked if Madame was waiting for her from the cloakroom. Antonia was sure that Madame was very interested in what was going on here. She knew that this was a good chance to ruin Mills's reputation. Sometime later, Antonia entered the dressing room and apologized for the long wait. Madame smiled and said that there was nothing to worry about. She said that the drawing room still retained traces of the previous countess, and the view was captivating. Antonia, in turn, was very happy to hear good words about her parents. Antonia said that she hadn't chosen a dress for a very long time and didn't even know what was in fashion now. Antonia said this phrase very clearly and thought that Madame would react to it. The Madame said that the young lady need not worry as she had several different designs. The young lady slowly began to look through the catalog. The young lady saw the head maid who was serving them. Antonia became thoughtful as she saw that the maid was setting the table for herself, although she usually did not do this. She looked through the catalog, knowing that Madame was confident that some styles would remain popular for a long time. She knew that if she were older, she would make her public debut and try to make money from dresses. To endure her extravagant husband, she thought about building a new estate. That was the only thing that came to her mind. Antonia smiled and said that all the dresses were very beautiful. She said that their style had changed a lot over the past years, and she didn't know what to choose. Madame said that she could advise her. She smiled and said it would be nice to look at a design with lace. Antonia said that she seemed to know a lot, and that seemed to be the reason her mother liked to talk to her. Madame smiled and thanked her for her kind words, and she also said that she had always been grateful to the former countess. The former countess decided to support the young lady's talent, and in doing so helped her greatly. The young lady smiled and said, "Madam, she has really wonderful designs." Antonia slowly began to choose a suitable dress for herself. The head maid was furious because the lady had brazenly chosen several outfits for herself at once. The maid thought that one would be enough for her. Antonia said that she would order everything except 2. The head maid was furious, wondering if the lady would really wear 7 outfits at once. The head maid knew that the Count would not have allowed her to do such a thing, and she herself would not have allowed her to take such outfits. Madame asked if she didn't like the other outfits, as she was paying attention to her taste. Antonia said they were too bright. Madame said they were gorgeous and would look great with her hair. Antonia asked if her mother really liked such outfits. Madame said that this was exactly the case, and for this reason, she made more of them. Antonia said he didn't think he could wear those same outfits. The maids, with tears in their eyes, asked their mistress if she was okay. Antonia told them not to make such faces. The head maid was furious. Madame said that her train of thought was very simple, since she would look very beautiful in these outfits, and she only cared about beauty. The young lady sighed heavily and told Madame not to tell anyone about it, but she still thought she was ugly. Madame said that such a thing simply could not happen, and my lady should not worry about such things. The head maid was furious and didn't understand what was going on and why they were having such a nice conversation. She looked at them with fury, but said nothing. She could barely contain herself. The young lady looked at the catalog and said that the hats would not suit her. Madame said that in that case, she would cross them off the list. Antonia also made adjustments to one design and said with a smile that she was waiting for the rest of the order. She also looked at the shoes. The young lady sighed heavily and said that her previous shoes were so small that she could not wear them. The young lady, in turn, wanted to prepare the ground so that the rumors would spread faster. The head maid was shocked and thought the young lady had gone mad. The head maid knew that the young lady had first fired all her servants and was now spending the Count's bills like water. The maid thought for a moment, because she knew that it was not her money. She thought that the Count would be very angry when he found out about such a thing. The maid knew that the young lady had no idea what she was doing and would not allow her such luxury. She knew that with all the money she spent today, she could buy a small store. Last time she gave up because she ran out of money, but she still has one building in the shopping district. The building is small, but the location is great. She knew she didn't have enough silver yet, and she was only short 30 silver coins. The maid knew that most of the dresses the lady bought today cost at least 10 silver coins per outfit. She wanted to write a letter immediately, because Mr. Paul should know about everything. She didn't know what she wrote about last time, but she knew that this time, everything would be fine. She knew that when the gentleman found out the amount of money his niece had spent, he would definitely change his mind about his decision. And she wanted to write him a letter this time and tell him everything. The maid smiled and asked her mistress if she would mind if they tidied up her closet. The young lady smiled and said that it was a very good job and she would like them to sort out all the things quickly, as she was not feeling well. Polly glanced sideways at her friend and asked if she had taken her job. Polly said it seemed like she wanted to do it too. The maid sighed heavily and said that this was not so, and she simply did not want to make a noise in front of my lady. Polly said that the young lady's closet was full of useless things, and she would like to sort through and reorganize everything for convenience. Polly smiled and said that my lady now had new and beautiful dresses, and asked the lady whether she should fill the wardrobe with them or with something else. The young lady, in turn, saw that her maid looked very happy. She knew she didn't have any things at all, and she didn't mind if they took them, because she wanted Dora and the other maids to be happy. She had already worn them, and she wanted others to wear them too. The maids looked at the young lady and said that she was just great, as the head maid was very angry. The young lady said that it was so because she spent a lot of money. The maids looked at the young lady and said that if she showed them her handwriting again, they could check it. The young lady looked at them and said that there was no need to forge letters anymore. The maid was surprised and asked if this was true. The maid said that in that case they would come to check the execution of orders. Antonia asked if the head maid would really go to her uncle. The maid said that before this she had asked Uncle Paul. She asked if it would not be better to block the head maid's mail. The young lady said that there was no point in that, and when her uncle returned, she would of course have to be honest. The young lady smiled and told the maid not to worry. Antonia said that by that time, she would have everything ready, and the head maid would no longer be able to manage the Count's budget. The maids looked at each other in bewilderment. They were surprised and did not know what their mistress was preparing. The head maid wrote down all the things the young lady had bought and sent the list to Rhodo. She knew that if she also wrote the amount of money spent, It would be difficult even for Mr. to be generous in this situation. She knew that the letter would be delivered soon. The head maid knew that in this case he would return faster. The mere thought of it made her happy. The head maid knew she had to try to impress him. She recalled that she had said in the magazine that rumors about events spread very quickly in the capital's religious circles. If she married Mr. Paul, there would be a stir and she would raise her status. The maid knew that she needed to learn to be graceful in advance. A moment later, she heard a knock on the door and told the maid that someone might come in. The head maid asked the maid why she didn't ask for another day off. She asked her if she had really gone for a walk yesterday too. The maid said that everything was true, and yesterday she went shopping and heard a strange rumor. The maid looked at the servant in bewilderment and asked what strange rumor they were talking about. The maid hesitated, not knowing what to say. She said that she had heard it before. The head maid was a little irritated, as she wanted to hear everything in more detail and quickly. She told the maid not to be shy and to tell everything. The maid sighed heavily and, collecting her thoughts, said that rumors said that they were mocking the young lady. The head maid was shocked by this information. She looked at the maid and asked what she had just said. She asked angrily who was spreading such nonsense. She said it was just madness, and asked who was making fun of whom. She asked angrily if she could say anything about the young lady. The head maid said that these were just terrible rumors, and sometimes it was difficult for her to even meet with the young lady one-on-one. The maid knew that the estate was in disarray because of the young lady, and she was spending a lot of the estate's budget on unnecessary things. The head maid was furious and did not understand where she had bullied the young lady. She shouted that she could gain weight, and the count always told her to take care of the young lady. The head maid knew that the young lady always looked pitiful and weak, and she had already told her several times that she would only marry for convenience. The maid tried to calm the head maid down and told her not to scream because everyone could hear. The head maid was furious, but everyone had calmed down a bit. She kept telling herself that she needed to calm down. She looked at the maid and asked if she had scared her. The head maid said with a smile that this was very strange, as she had always been generous with food and clothing for the young lady. The maid said that she loved the young lady very much and did everything for her good. The maid looked at the head maid with a smile and said that this was, of course, so. The head maid looked at the maid and said that she had said earlier that she could not buy clothes because her brother was sick. She said that it bothered her very much and she just could not look at her. She handed the maid a few coins and told her to take them for her brother's winter clothes. The head maid said that it would be a great shame if they got sick. The maid was shocked, but also very grateful. The maid thanked the head maid and said that she was very kind, but she, in turn, made her listen to complete nonsense. The head maid sighed heavily. She knew that everyone could be bribed with money. She knew that the lady wanted to ruin her reputation by spreading a dirty rumor. But she had a deep pocket that Paul had entrusted to her. The head maid was furious. She could not allow the young lady to do what she wanted. Polly looked at her mistress with a puzzled expression and said that she had terrible news, because just a couple of days ago, everyone was saying that they were on their side, and now they felt sorry for the head maid. The young lady asked in surprise if this was true, and the maid said that they very easily changed their minds for a couple of silver coins. The young lady said that it was definitely not because of a couple of coins. The maid was furious and did not understand why her ladyship was so calm about it. The young lady said that they were entitled to about 220 coins a month, and now it was clear why money solves everything. The maid looked at her friend and said with a smile that my lady says there is no need to worry so much. Antonia said with a smile that everything was fine and that it couldn't be better, but Polly, in turn, was very puzzled by this situation. Polly said they were trying to find everything bad about her. Antonia said they were getting paid to do that, so they were getting their money's worth. Antonia said that, although she owned the estate, the allowance was paid by the head maid. The maids looked at the young lady intently. They did not know what to answer. Antonia looked at her maids and said that, on the other hand, it seemed like they were losing their wages because of her, and that made her very sad. Polly was shocked. She said she had nothing to worry about. She said the cooks were already charging quite a lot anyway, 20% less for food and clothing. The maid smiled and said that she thought so too, and even if that were the case, the pay was still decent. The young lady sighed heavily and said that they needed to be patient, as the next payment would be much smaller in comparison, but she fell silent and did not finish. The maids looked at their mistress in surprise and asked, in comparison with what? Antonia said that the head maid started the rumor. She in turn wondered how many people would believe it. The lady knew that the maid could not give money to everyone on the premises. The head maid looked at those present in anger and asked what was going on. The maid looked at Madame and asked why she had not warned her that they had arrived so early in the morning. The lady smiled and said that she had come to deliver the outfits that had been previously ordered. Madame said that she would like to deliver them to the lady of this estate, and she was also asked to prepare winter coats for all the people of the estate. The head maid was shocked. She looked at Madame and asked what she was talking about. The head maid was perplexed. She looked at the drawers with clothes and wondered how much of them were in the drawers. She was shocked as she realized that the young lady had decided to set her up again. The head maid, in turn, had not yet chosen what she would order for herself. The lady looked at her subordinate and said that, in any case, a lot of goods came out this time. The head maid looked at her with skill and asked what was going on. Madame smiled a feigned smile and asked the maid what she had heard the way she spoke to her servant. The head maid was furious because she saw that Madame was mocking her. Mrs. Mills, Madame? That she visited the estate given to her too often. Madame smiled and said that she had recently heard many rumors that in one noble family there was a man who was not the owner, but acted as if he was the boss here. The madam asked the head maid with a grin if this rumor was accidentally about her. She said that a person is even ignored by those who are not on his side. Madam told the head maid that the man could not even do his job properly. She said that obviously this did not apply to the pure-hearted Countess Mrs. Mills. The head maid smiled and told Madam that she did not think it had anything to do with the Count's family. She said, Madam, that it was very rude for a frequent visitor to the house to begin making such innuendos. The maid looked at Madam and said that she had already finished preparing. Madam smiled and asked if this was true. She said that in that case they should go already as they had a lot of orders. The madam smiled and asked the head maid to give the note to the young lady. She said with a smile on her face that only uneducated people try to hide something. Smiling, she slowly left the estate. The head maid was furious. She looked after her angrily, but in turn said nothing. She thought that Madam was the last bitch. Some time later, the head maid burst into the young lady's room and called her. Miss Mills angrily asked the young lady what she was doing. Antonia looked at the head maid in bewilderment and asked what she was doing in her room. The head maid said in her rage that because of her thoughtless actions, she had to come to her as soon as possible. The young lady looked at the head maid in bewilderment and asked when she had allowed her to enter her room. The mistress asked if it was really that important now. She said furiously that her clothing bill was 1 gold coin and 40 silver coins. She said that the lady from the store had left the clothes and just walked away. She couldn't believe that the young lady had actually ordered so many clothes. The young lady sighed heavily and asked what the matter was. She said that winter was coming and they needed to think about clothes. The maid was furious and shouted that this was very bad. She said that the lady did not know all the numbers yet. The maid was furious. She asked if the young lady really thought that this amount was very cheap. Antonia looked at her in bewilderment and asked if she knew how many people worked on their estate. The head maid asked angrily how she could not know. Antonia asked if this amount was really too much for all the servants. Antonia asked if the head maid also wanted to wear cheap coats. The head maid looked at the young lady in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about, who had not said that if she wanted to spend less money buying coats for everyone, then she should buy cheap coats. Antonia said that she was also considered the butler of the estate. She asked if this was not so. The head maid was furious. The head maid said that, of course she was different, and her monthly pay was different too. She said that since her pay was different, that meant she was entitled to different clothes. Antonia said that she already had a fan and a fireplace in her room, so she could wear cheap coats or not wear them in the oats. The maid was furious and shouted at the young lady that it didn't matter now. The young lady looked at her in surprise and asked what she meant by that. The lady said that if Sir Paul found out about it, she said that she was keeping everything secret because she was thinking about such details. But the young lady was not thinking about anything. Antonia looked at her in surprise and asked if she was hiding everything because she was thinking about her. The head maid said that this was the case, but Antonia knew that it was a lie. The head maid knew that the young lady knew nothing about the letters she and Paul had written to each other. The young lady smiled at the maid and asked how he knew how many clothes she had ordered. The maid looked at the young lady in confusion. Antonia said that it seemed like she was lying. Antonia asked the maid if she really thought that she was still a child and could be easily deceived. The head maid was shocked. She realized that Sir did not answer any of her letters. She asked this question, Does this mean that the young lady intercepted all her letters? She asked the lady if he really sent her reply letters. The young lady, in turn, understood that this situation was not funny at all. She saw that the head maid had such a face as if her lover had betrayed her. When she was young, she was also deceived by the same expression. When she was about 17 years old, my maid took care of her constantly, but not always properly. The head maid looked at the young lady in surprise and asked if she was in much pain. The maid said that the debut was still ahead, and she did not know what to do since her ice was so painful. She said that Sir Paul was very busy. He had not yet given permission to call a doctor, so she would go get some medicine. She said with a smile that in any case, she could only thank the young lady. When Antonia was only 13 years old, the cooks left the estate, and then just one warm word made her cross the border. She didn't even believe her mother's story, the truth being that she herself had accepted the head maid and allowed her to work in the estate because she had nowhere else to go. That's why she couldn't forget the expression on the head maid's face that day. The head maid smiled and said that she had brought soup and medicine, and that my lady should refresh herself. The young lady looked at the tray in surprise and asked if this was all for her. The maid smiled and said that it was true, and she should start eating before it got cold, and that she needed to take her medicine. The young lady was puzzled because she could not eat properly. It was painful for her to eat, but still she had no choice and had to cope with it. Then the young lady had no doubt that the maid had brought her medicine. The maid gave her medicine to weaken her, but it was rarely used because it had terrible side effects. Then, on the orders of her father, a young priest came to the estate. If he had not noticed her at all, she would have simply died. Now the young lady didn't care how pitiful and soft the face in front of her was. She no longer trusted her. Antonia asked the maid if she really thought her uncle was obliged to report to her. The maid looked at the young lady in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about now. The lady asked her if she really didn't understand anything now. Antonia asked her if it was so surprising. She said that the lady was just a housewife. The head maid was shocked. She said in a trembling voice that Mr. Paul said that he trusted her to manage the estate. The young lady looked at her intently and said that she was ill then, and for that reason he trusted everything to her. The lady said that she was healthy now, and she was still her uncle's niece, and she had more power. The head maid was dejected and did not know what to answer. A moment later, there was a knock on the door, and a question asked if they could come in. The maid opened the door and said with a smile that she had received a letter that morning, and it was from Mr. Paul. The young lady smiled and asked if all the letters were from him. The head maid froze in bewilderment. The maid said that it was not all for her, as she heard that the head maid was here now and wanted to give both. The head maid was shocked. She thought it was a lie. As it was obvious that Mr. Paul was very busy, she was hastily pulling the letter out of the envelope. The maid was shocked because Sir Paul wrote to her to leave the entire estate budget to Antonia. He also asked why she began to distort the words of the Count. He said that she also harassed his niece and asked when he asked her about such a thing. The head maid was shocked. She realized that the mister always wanted to kick her out. She was furious and could not understand how this could happen. She knew that he had said earlier that he believed in her. He had written that he saw that his niece was thinking about him, so he ordered the dress with all his care. He said that she even sent him a gift and said that she was worried about him. He asked the maid if she had really lied to him. The sir was furious and did not understand how the maid could say that his niece spent the money when she had not even touched it. He wrote that because of her, he had almost lost contact with his niece. The head maid was shocked and wondered if the young lady had sent the gentleman a gift. The maid looked at the young lady and said that she had lied to her uncle. The missus was shocked and furious. She knew that she had not found out anything yet, but the fact that Sir had forgiven her for the dress was complete nonsense. The young lady looked at the maid in bewilderment and asked her if she really thought she could lie to her uncle. The young lady told her that she was much easier to deceive. The maid looked at the young lady in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about. She asked if she was really saying that she had deceived her intentionally. The head maid looked closely at the young maids. The missus looked at the maids. She knew that they were very smart girls. The young lady smiled and said that she was just a little girl and never lied about the amount of clothes. She just wrote how she bought them. The maid asked in bewilderment if she hadn't spent the money. The lady smiled, looking at the maid, and said that, although she was the Count's housekeeper, she still knew nothing about the situation in the family. Antonia knew that if she were an ordinary girl, she would not have guessed about it. Her late mother had paid for clothes for 10 years in advance. This time she paid. In the old days, when a young lady was about 16 years old, She could only buy a new dress twice a year, and she paid for it, but even that was not new. The young lady was a little surprised, because it was only now that she realized that before Mrs. Mills and Dora began to wear her clothes in turns, she wore quite beautiful dresses. Thanks to them, she was a noble girl, and then she liked it very much, and she also liked the people who surrounded her. She liked them because her mother liked this style. One day she was very envious of the head maid and asked her if she could ask her uncle for a new dress. The head maid looked at the lady in surprise and said that she was talking about something she did not know. She asked if the young lady really thought that the Count's budget could afford such luxury. The head maid said that they were just wearing what had already been used. The missus did not understand why the young lady thought ill of them. Then the young lady felt very ashamed of her words, but she learned the truth much later. Even her maid did not know about it. And it was all Mrs. Mills's idea. The maid knelt before the young lady and said that she had been ordered to find proof of payment in the former countess's room. The maid said that it was all about the dresses. The previous countess left money for outfits. The mistress found them and bought her some too. The young lady was shocked, and the maid, in turn, shouted at her that she knew nothing about it. The young lady recalled her past life. She remembered that she was in shock when she learned about something like this. Antonia looked at the head maid and said it was no wonder Madame said everything was fine, when she hadn't even chosen a design yet. Antonia looked at the head maid and said that she thought differently, and she said that the maid had heard everything wrong. The young lady asked if she had said that if she bought clothes, her uncle would take her side. The head maid was furious. The young lady asked what dress she should wear, as she had described in detail how many she had bought. The maid looked at the lady with fury and asked if she had really done that. Antonia looked at the maid intently and asked if she still believed in her uncle. The lady was furious. She was not going to apologize to the young lady. She had previously thought that the girl was very pathetic, but she kept upsetting her. She didn't understand why everyone told her that she was just a housewife and had to look after the young lady. She knew that one day she could become a countess. The head maid looked intently at the young lady, but remained silent. Anthony, in turn, understood that the maid really didn't know. I wanted to give her another chance. Wanting to give her a chance to avoid making her life a living hell, the young lady told the maid that she should write a letter. The maid looked at her in surprise and asked if she really wanted her to write a letter that was unfavorable to her. She asked if the lady really wanted to tell Mr. Paul everything. The young lady told the maid to write the letter anyway. Antonia said that if she wasn't sure, she didn't have to write, and then she would immediately fly out of the estate. The young lady looked at her with disdain and said that she would fly out only at her own request. The head maid was furious. She said that this simply could not be, and asked if the lady really thought she could get away with it so easily. She shouted that her word meant nothing. The young lady smiled and said she could take care of herself. The maid asked her why she was asking him to write a letter instead of just throwing her out. The young lady said that she just felt sorry for her. She said that if you just throw her out, she will blame her for everything. Antonia said that she herself does not like it because it is not her fault. The young lady smiled and said that for that reason, she was giving her another chance. And showing the catalog, she asked if the maid had seen this product anywhere. The head maid looked at the catalog in bewilderment. She didn't understand what it was all about. A moment later, she froze as she read that the Grand Duchess's treasures, Empress Sion's necklace, and the Tears of Morning Dew had been stolen. The young lady said that her uncle gave her the necklace. She looked at the maid and asked if she thought they looked very similar. The maid trembled, not knowing what to answer. The maid hesitated and said that everything was exactly like that. The young lady told her to read the newspaper again. Antonia said that you can see a coat of arms with a hawk and a sword. The head maid was perplexed. She did not understand what the young lady was talking about. Antonia asked if her uncle could answer this question. Antonia said that if she walked around with this necklace often, people would think that she had great power in her hands. The head maid was furious. She looked at the young lady and told her not to talk nonsense. Antonia looked at her in bewilderment and asked why she was talking nonsense. The maid said that she heard that Paul wanted to sell it. She asked the young lady if she knew that it was a symbol of her love for Mr. Paul. The maid was confused and did not understand why the lady continued to talk about the stolen property. Antonia asked if she now suspected her uncle. The head maid froze in bewilderment. The young lady said that instead of asking her about it, she had better ask her uncle. The maid hesitated. She saw that it seemed that she really was not indifferent to her, but she knew that it made no sense. The young lady looked at the maid and told her to just leave, and if she left the estate, she would forgive her everything. The maid hesitated, but still agreed with her. The young lady stared at the maid, who looked at the young mistress, and asked if it wasn't worth waiting a little. Since she was sure that there would be a commotion when her uncle returned, the young lady smiled and said that there was nothing to worry about. She sighed heavily and said that everything would end before her uncle returned. When she received the letter from the head maid, she thought that she did not have long to live in the estate. But now she knew that the Grand Duke was sending people after her uncle. She knew that after tricking the Duke into stealing the necklace, her uncle went into hiding because he was afraid of being caught. This was the real reason why she often left the estate. The maid looked at the young lady with bewilderment and asked why she gave the maid a chance. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she would be ashamed to blame her for something she had not done. Polly said that they needed to talk to the boss immediately, as he played the villain very well. The young lady stopped the maid. Antonia said she doesn't like it when Martina worries without reason. The maid said that she wanted to ask the boss something after she was scolded. The young lady looked at her maid in confusion and asked what she was talking about. The maid said she would be scolded for a minute, but she thought the boss would forgive her. Antonia asked in bewilderment if she was really sweet. The maid smiled and said that she was the sweetest in the world. The southerner said that perhaps she shouldn't have said it, but the young lady was like a younger sister to her. Antonia sighed heavily and said that she forgave her this time. Polly looked at her mistress in surprise and asked if she was really forgiving her this time. She had asked her lady to forgive her a couple of times before. Lorena told her friend that if she wanted to be the young lady's sister, then she would bully her. Polly sighed heavily and said that if that was the case, then she refused. The young lady, in turn, looked intently at the maids. She was glad that there were such wonderful people around her. The maid looked at the head maid and said that she had received a letter. The head maid took the letter from the maid and told her to leave quickly. The head maid couldn't contain her curiosity and forgot everything the young lady said. She wrote the letter because she believed in Paul. With trembling hands, she opened the letter. Sir wrote to her that it seemed he did not know enough about her suffering. He said that long ago he did a favor to the owner of the necklace, and she promised him that she would return the debt, and she was still looking for an opportunity. He wrote that he would like to see her in this necklace. The head maid was furious. She did not understand how he could do this to her. He gave her the necklace with a smile and said that it was proof that he trusted her. He said that if she followed him, many gifts awaited her. Sir said that he never renounces those who are on his side. After his words, she completely believed him. The maid was furious because she realized that he had betrayed her from the very beginning. She understood that it was just a stupid dream. The maid was furious. She did not understand how he could do this to her. She thought that if she begged the young lady, then perhaps she would give her a license. She knew that even the previous countess had accepted her, and out of pity, the young lady looked intently at the maid. A moment later, she entered her room and called her. The maid said that she had been deceived and asked the young lady for forgiveness, and also asked to give her just one chance, and she would do anything for her. She begged the young lady to give her permission to stay where she was. She said she could even organize the laundry and help in the kitchen. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she could not allow it, since her uncle already knew everything. And besides, she was too pathetic for this place. The maid asked in bewilderment if it was so important. She told my lady that she was completely wrong and asked to save her. Antonia looked at her intently and, handing over the letter, told her to take it and leave immediately. The maid asked in bewilderment what it was. Antonia said that it was just an introduction. She said that the place was called the Viscount Club, and that she could get there by carriage in a month. Antonia told her to take the letter with her, and she could work there as a housewife. The head maid was surprised and did not understand why my lady was treating her this way, but she did not say that she could not simply throw out the person who worked in her house. She said that she did not want to live with such a sin on her soul. The maid thought that she should have begged her from the very beginning, and then perhaps she would not have had to leave the Count and go to a dead place. She didn't know where this place was, but she still thanked my lady with a smile for this opportunity. She just wanted to stop and go there and start all over again. She hoped that there would be no receiver in that place and everything would go smoothly. The maids looked at the young lady in surprise and asked why she had written an introduction for the maid at all. Antonia said that it would be better for her. The lady said that she felt sick when she heard bad news. The maid smiled and said that the young lady was very kind. Polly said that in her place, having heard bad news, she would have danced with happiness. They did not know where they could find such a person as their mistress. The young lady thought for a moment about the place where she had sent the head maid, which was famous among her acquaintances before she returned. She knew that the old Viscount had a stingy and eccentric personality, and it was said that when servants came to him, they tried their best and could only escape after death. The young lady knew that a successor would only appear after the death of the Viscount, and there were a huge number of rumors about him in high society. The young lady, in turn, did not want to devote the rest of her life to the man who had ruined her life. She was wondering if she could get rid of them all, since she still had many people to take revenge on. After the head maid left the estate, the young lady set about renovating her estate. Martina looked at the maids with fury and said that it was completely shameless on their part. She did not understand what they were even thinking. The maids said that they didn't want to at all, and they didn't do anything. Another maid asked if they had done this because of their stupidity. Martina said that the maid left in a lady's new dress 6 months ago. The maid said in a trembling voice that the lady did not mind. Martina asked angrily what she was talking about, since at that moment the lady could not say a word. Martina asked if the maid really thought she knew nothing. Martina said that the maid gave the young lady's earrings to the pawn shop. The maid said that she could not resist as her brother was very ill. Martina looked at them with fury and told the maid not to talk nonsense, because after selling them at the pawn shop, she went to the casino and spent all the money. Martina told them that they should be grateful that they had not confiscated all their ill-gotten gains. The maids trembled with fear, but said nothing. Martina looked at the other maids and told them to throw them out immediately. The lady, in turn, stared out the window and watched as the maids left her estate. She was glad that they were all gone. The young lady, in turn, looked in the head maid's safe and found 5 gold coins in it. And in the room of one of the maids, she was even able to find her mother's things. Previously, she thought that only her maid was involved in theft, but now she knew about all the servants. Martina looked at the young lady and congratulated her on her full recovery. Martina smiled and said that, after all, they wouldn't let her things go to waste. Antonia said that her mother wanted to give her all the things after she grew up. She looked closely at Martina. Martina smiled and said that it seemed like she was in charge here now. The young lady smiled and said that she was not in charge, and she wanted to say that her uncle had entrusted her with managing the budget, but she did not know at all how to do it. The young lady smiled and told Martina that it would be great if she could help her. The lady said that her mother did the same, even though she knew that she liked being a cook more than being an accountant. The lady smiled and said that Martina could become the house manager. Antonia said that in the future, she would have to hire a butler or official manager, but there was no need for that now. The young lady looked closely at her companion and asked if she could become the house manager. Martina was shocked. She was blinded by the beauty of the young lady. She did not understand why the lady looked so much like the countess. She looked at the young lady intently and said that there was no one else like her. Martina smiled and said that she was a strong woman who handled difficult roles well. Martina told the young lady not to worry about anything. Antonia was very glad that Martina supported her, and she thanked her for her help with a smile. Martina saw a beautiful young lady in front of her. She was delighted with her changes. She thought that it would be better to put off working with numbers for now. Martina understood that what was more important now was that her ladyship was happy. The young lady sighed heavily as she sat at the table. The maid looked closely at her mistress and asked what was wrong with her. The young lady looked at the maid in surprise, but did not answer. The maid said that she was constantly sighing. The maid asked the young lady if she was not getting enough sleep. Lorena was very puzzled by the young lady's condition and asked if she didn't like the food. The young lady said that was not the case. Polly asked if it was true that the chef was so worried that she didn't even touch her food. The young lady sighed heavily as she was more worried. She knew that no matter how delicious the food was, she still had a hard time eating 5 slices of French toast after eating. But in turn, the young lady was very nervous, as she was waiting for an answer that did not come for a very long time. About a couple of months ago, she did not write any letters to her uncle at all. She was confused because he did not answer her, and she thought that he most likely thought that she had lied to him. She was confused, for she knew that she had put the Countess's seal correctly, and thought that, of course, the enemy of her enemy must be her friend. She knew that the Grand Duke, the Emperor's half-brother, was only 5 years older than her. When she married her ex-husband, her uncle submitted a request to the emperor that he might be a good candidate for the role of count. There have been many cases in the past where a count could have lost his position. The Grand Duke looked at them with fury and asked why such a great sinner wanted to become a count. The young lady looked at the Duke in surprise, as he had then accused her uncle. From that day on, she forever remembered his eyes, which were staring at her. She remembered his dark hair, his tall stature, his sharp and expressive face with a prominent chin, and his powerful presence alone. That day, for some reason, even though they didn't know each other, Richard looked at her with pity. But after a long look, he turned away from her without saying a word. The young lady knew she would never forget him. But unfortunately, she knew she had been a little slow. She knew she had to send a letter to the Grand Duchess. She simply sent the letter, but was still very puzzled that she had not yet received a response. Antonia understood that if she could enlist her uncle's help, things would be much easier for her in the future. The maids looked at the young lady intently and laughed out loud. Antonia looked at them in surprise and asked if she had sighed again. The maid smiled and said that it was so. A moment later they looked at her and said with a smile that for this reason she should come with them. The young lady looked at them in bewilderment, as she did not understand what they were planning. The maids looked closely at the young lady and asked if she was okay. Antonia smiled and said that everything was fine. The maid said that the chef was very attentive and prepared a lot of delicious food for them. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she thought this was too much. The young lady wondered if she should take a little walk, and since it had been a long time since she had walked around the area, the maid asked my lady if she wanted to return to the estate. The young lady smiled and said that she would like to take a little walk. The maid said that in that case, she would go with her. The young lady smiled and said that there was no need for that, as she just wanted to be alone. Antonia told them that she would be back soon, and they did not need to worry. The maids were shocked and called for my lady, but she decided not to listen to them. The young lady, in turn, felt very sorry for the maids, but she now wanted to think about something and wanted to be in silence. As she walked along the path, she thought for a moment. Since she had not walked for a long time, when she was little, she often walked with her parents, and she knew that at the end of the path there was a small hut that her parents had built for her. The young lady, in turn, wondered whether she should go there before leaving. In her past life, her uncle died and she never met him. She knew he lived here, but she needed living proof. She knew that there was not an ounce of happiness in her past life. She wondered if she should make sure that everything was going well for now. She knew that the letter she wrote to her uncle was okay, but she couldn't trust him blindly. She knew that even though such a good tracker as the head maid had disappeared from her sight, her uncle would still find her a new deal. Even though she was a Grand Duchess in her past life, she still wouldn't dare to return back. The young lady understood that she needed to prepare everything carefully. Walking along the path, she thought, but a moment later, hearing a noise, she turned around. Turning around, the young lady saw a terrible wolf. She was very scared and froze in place. A moment later, she fell to the ground as the wolf pounced on her. The young lady was in shock. She wondered if she would die like this again. She hoped that someone would help her. A moment later, she looked in surprise at the wolf lying next to her. The young lady was shocked because she heard that someone shot at the wolf. She did not know who it could be. But a moment later, she saw the boy. The young man looked at her and asked if she was okay. The young lady froze in bewilderment. She stared intently at the young man. He came closer to her and said that her clothes were a little wrinkled. The young lady was in shock and couldn't even put 2 words together. She wanted to say thank you. The young lady was confused and did not understand why she could not say anything. She thought it was all strange and did not know what to do. With tears in her eyes, she asked for forgiveness. The boy looked at her and said that she did not need to ask for forgiveness. He took her hand and said that everything was okay. When she found herself in a difficult situation, she immediately realized that she was finished. She had already died once, and her life was hopeless, but she still thought that now everything was fine, but everything only got worse. The young man looked at the young lady with a keen gaze and extended his hand to her, holding a piece of candy in it. He smiled and said that this should calm her down a little. The young lady slowly took the candy and thanked him. Antonia ate it with gusto. The young man smiled tenderly and said that she could say more if she wanted to. The young lady looked closely at the boy, as she saw that he looked several years older than her, but still his face seemed somehow strange to her. She looked at him intently, because she knew that she had not seen him before her return. She noticed that he had a very handsome face, and if she saw him somewhere, she would definitely not forget him. The young man looked at her and asked if she was okay now. Antonia smiled and thanked him, since thanks to him she was alive. The young man looked at her and said that he thought she should leave as soon as possible. The young lady looked at him in bewilderment and asked what he was talking about. The young man said that the wolf was not dead, but he simply put it in the corner, and in a few hours it would wake up. Antonia looked closely at the boy. She thought that he could be a knight apprentice. She learned that usually knight apprentices use sleeping cartridges instead of killing ones. The young lady looked at him in bewilderment and asked what to do with the wolf then. He looked at her and said that she should avoid the wolf and then send a message. She looked at him intently and asked which knight he served. The young man looked at her in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about. Antonia asked if he was not a knight's apprentice. She asked if she had mixed something up. The young lady looked at him closely and wondered if he was not a knight's apprentice. Why was he carrying such a large gun? She realized that in that case he would not have sleeping bullets. And besides, he had a suit to match. The young man looked at her and said that she had thought of everything correctly. The young lady asked if she was right and also asked if she could ask him for a favor. He asked if she really wanted him to finish off the corner. The young lady said that it was so, since if the wolf remained here, then someone might get hurt. The young man thought for a moment and said that this seemed like the Lord's wish. Antonia looked at him and said that she would do it. The young man looked at her in bewilderment. The young lady looked intently at her new friend and said that she was Countess Sergi. The young lady looked at him closely. She knew it would be more effective than if she said she was the Earl's niece. She wondered if he was upset since she could see he was acting like a friend to her. The young man looked at her and asked how he should address her. Antonia said that it did not matter and asked if she could ask him for a favor. He smiled and said that of course she could do it. She noticed that he was not familiar with high words. The young lady wondered if he had never met aristocrats. She thought that maybe he just did not like them. He looked at her intently and said that if she were a countess, she could call knights to this territory. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she could not do this now. The young man asked in bewilderment what this was connected with. She looked at him with a smile, because she understood that before her uncle found out about this, she needed to find a way to earn money. She knew that the Count's territory was not as peaceful as it seemed. This was due to the fact that there were few knights in the territory. Then she told him that she would take care of everything and pay if he wanted something. The young man said that he would like to ask for something. He sighed heavily and said that he actually needed a place to stay for the winter. The young lady looked at him in surprise. She, of course, understood that if she sent him to the estate, her uncle would be angry when he found out about it. She understood that that wolf could destroy all her memories of this forest. For a moment, the young lady thought, and a brilliant idea came to her. She looked at the young man and said that there was a hut in the forest. The young lady slowly walked into the room, noticing that there was a lot of dust in the room and that the place had changed a lot in 2 years. The young lady slowly looked around the room, as all the furniture remained the same, and this brought back memories of her parents. Looking at the young man, she said that the house had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen and a bathroom. She said that it would be necessary to cut wood for the fireplace, and this young lady would send him services. The young man looked at the young lady and said that there was no need for that, and he did not need a servant at all. The young lady looked at him in bewilderment and asked why he was saying that. The young man said that he could handle it alone. Antonia said that in that case, she would need to carry him equipment and ingredients. The young man said that this was true, and the main problem now was the wolf. She looked at him and asked if this meant he was accepting the quest. He looked at her and timidly said that it was so. The young lady looked at the young man intently and said with a smile that he could make himself at home. She asked if a reward of 1 gold piece would do. She understood that it was normal, since they would only see each other in the winter, and it would be nice if she had friends her own age. The young man said that he would better prepare this place for habitation. She looked at him and asked in surprise if she understood correctly that he said that he would stay here for the winter. Antonia said there were several things a knight could do in the county. She said that if 1 gold piece was enough, the servant would pay for her. The young man smiled and said that that would be enough, and also said that he understood everything. The young lady thought for a moment, as she felt as if she had seen his face before. He looked at her in surprise and asked if she really wanted to say something. The young lady was taken aback and asked what his name was, since he had not said anything earlier. The young man looked at her in surprise and asked if she really wanted to know his name. The young lady smiled and said that she would like to hear, since they were already friends. A moment later, he said his name was Richard, and the young lady looked at him in surprise. Antonia looked at Richard intently, as his name sounded like a soft, fluffy lump. She knew the name suited him very well. Richard said that he would take her home. They slowly walked out onto the path, and Richard said that everything was quiet in the area. If she just went straight ahead, the maids would meet her. Naledi looked at him intently and asked if the wolf was still sleeping. He said that it was. A moment later, they met the maids. The maids were surprised and about the task, but looked at their mistress and asked if she had fallen. They were very worried and wanted to know if she was okay and if she was hurt anywhere. The young lady smiled and said that she was okay and they didn't need to worry. She smiled and said that she had simply fallen while playing with her new friend and that her clothes had just gotten a little dirty, but that she was not hurt. The maids looked at their mistress with puzzlement and worry. They wanted to object, but the young lady smiled a soft smile and said that she was fine. Antonia looked at Richard and told him he could go, and thanked him for seeing her out. Richard looked at the young lady with a smile and said, with a smile, that they would see each other again. For some time, the young ladies stared at the young man. The maid looked at her mistress and said that they needed to get back to the estate as soon as possible. The young lady agreed with her. The maid said that she needed to examine her mistress's wound, but Antonia said that she was fine. Martina looked at the young lady with surprise and confusion and asked if the wolf had really almost harmed her. The young lady looked at Martina and said that she was just a little scratched and that she was okay. She thought that she still shouldn't tell about it, since everyone was very worried about her. The maids looked at their mistress with excitement and said that she was a friend to them, and she said that she almost fell. The young lady was a little puzzled, as she would have liked to get away from this conversation, but the talk about knights and the hut gave her away. Martina walked up to the young lady and hugged her tightly. She was very worried about the lady. Martina sighed heavily and told the young lady that it seemed her father had blessed her. She said that if the young lady had died, she would have died with her. Antonia was shocked by this reaction. She gently patted Martina on the back and told her that she was okay. Martina looked at the young lady with tears in her eyes and said that from now on she must tell her everything. She also said that the young lady must take her maids with her wherever she goes. The young lady in turn reassured her and agreed with her. Martina said that for this reason she asked to leave some knights in the estate. She also said that she asked for forgiveness, since she did not even ask her consent to embrace. The young lady looked at her in surprise and said that there was no need for that, as she had often hugged her before when she was younger. Martina looked at the lady in surprise and asked if she really remembered everything. She also asked what feelings the young lady experienced when she was hugged. Antonia smiled and said that she liked it when Martina hugged her. Polly looked at her mistress and asked, "What about her?" Polly smiled and said that she also wanted to hug her sister. Martina was furious and said that this was complete rudeness. The maid was shocked. She screamed that she also wanted a hug. The young lady looked at them with a smile and said that she did not mind, as they were family to her. The maid ran up to her mistress with a smile on her face, as she wanted to hug her. Polly said to the young lady with a smile that sometimes she thought the young lady smelled like a sun person. Lorena stood quietly to the side and watched everything that was happening. But a moment later, the young lady came up to her and hugged her with a smile. The maid was surprised. Antonia said with a smile that if she didn't like it, she could stop. The maid smiled tenderly and said that everything was not so simple. She felt a little awkward. Lorena knew Polly was right, and their mistress smelled like sunshine. The wolf looked at the man and growled menacingly, but at the same time a weapon was pointed at him. Richard stared at the predator, and a moment later a shot rang out. Richard glanced sideways at Debbie and said that they should return. The knight obeyed the Grand Duke's order. Martina was shocked because she understood that this simply couldn't be true, that the living space hadn't been cleaned for 2 years. She knew that in order to survive the winter, she needed to get everything in order. She understood that, of course, the people who had saved her young mistress were now living there, but they had to take care of themselves too. Martina was very pleased because her young lady said she had made a good friend. She understood that she simply could not allow her friend to live in a dirty hut. Sometime later they came to the hut, and Martina knocked on the door. She said that they came from Count Sergi. The knight opened the door and greeted them with a smile. inviting them inside. Martina was shocked and couldn't believe how this was possible. She couldn't understand how they could put everything in order in just one day. She noticed that there were even animal skins on the ground. She thought that they had actually lived here for the past few years. Martina looked at the knight and introduced herself. She said that she served the count. She smiled and told the knight that he could call her by her name or whatever he liked. Debbie looked at her and also introduced himself with a smile on his face. In turn, Martina asked with a smile if he had saved her girl. Martina said that she didn't even know how to thank him for saving her. The knight looked at her and said that it was not he who saved my lady. Martina looked at him in bewilderment and asked what he was talking about. A moment later, Richard came down to them and greeted them with a smile. Martina froze in place. She was in shock as she realized who really saved her young lady. The knight smiled and said that my lady's savior was right in front of them. Debbie said that it was the apprentice knight Richard. She looked closely at the boy, as she thought that it was a girl. She thought for a moment, for the maids had led her to believe that this girl was a friend, because they said that my lady had found some beautiful ones at her friend's, and for this reason she had brought extra dresses for them. Martina sighed heavily and said that she heard that they did not need a servant. She looked at them and said that if they needed anything, they could leave a wish in the mailbox, as her servants checked the mailbox every 2 days. Martina looked at the maid and told her to bring the tools and food they had brought with them. Martina looked at the young man and said that my lady had given him a letter, and there was also half of the reward and an official request form. Richard looked at the miss and asked if the young lady was okay, as she was very scared. Martina smiled and said that the young lady was fine, and if he had free time, he could take a walk with the lady. Richard smiled a beaming smile and said that that would be a good idea, as he was very eager to meet the young lady. She looked closely at the young man. She noticed that he was very handsome, and now she understood why the girls called him a handsome friend. A moment later, Martina said goodbye to them and left. The knight looked at Richard and asked with a smile what he had just seen. Richard asked in surprise what he was talking about. Debbie asked him if he hated being treated like that. Debbie asked if he really asked permission to meet the young lady. He asked the Duke if he really wanted to stay in the hut. Debbie asked if Richard was now a knight's apprentice, and he was a full-fledged knight. Richard looked at him and said that everything was correct. Debbie continued talking, but Richard got tired of his talking and hit him on the leg. Debbie was shocked. He looked at Richard and asked why he hit him. Richard looked at him menacingly and said that if he said the word master again, he would cut out his tongue. Richard thought for a moment, holding the letters in his hands. Debbie looked at him in surprise and asked what was wrong with the letters. Richard said that they were indeed from the young girl countess, but the handwriting on the letter was the same as the letter sent to the Grand Duke. Debbie looked at Richard with surprise and confusion and asked if it was true. And wasn't it a fake? He said that she even allowed her servant to come to them and say hello. Richard hit his friend on the leg again, and Debbie the Kazakh screamed that it hurt. Richard told him to be more serious. Debbie told the Duke that he should pay him extra for this. Richard said that if he did his job well, he would raise his pay. In an instant, Debbie's expression changed and he became more serious and said that he would try. Richard thought for a moment. As the contents of the letter were very strange, he knew that no matter what he looked like, this letter could not have been written by a 12-year-old girl. He understood that this was very strange, as was the student's topic, which did not fit into the question. He was puzzled by this situation, but did not understand why. But still, he was very interested. He knew that she was as beautiful as snow on a winter lake, and the young lady interested him very much. Debbie looked at Richard and asked if he was really going there. Richard sighed heavily and said that he probably was, although it was just an ordinary letter. Richard, in turn, saw him running away, and if you look at the location of the thief, it becomes clear that he already knows everything. But still it seemed to him that something was wrong with Antonia. For him, she was a mystery. The Duke looked at his knight and said that in the eastern part, there was a demon with no many faces, and they had something to do in their spare time. The man greeted the young lady with a smile and said that he was very glad to see her, and he also introduced himself and said that his name was Formis Burton. Martina looked at the man in surprise and asked why he came without warning. The man smiled and, sighing heavily, said that he thought that Countess Sergi had already told her everything, and he also handed over a small letter. Martina looked closely at the letter. The young lady, in turn, knew that she did not need to look at the business card. She already knew his true face well, from her past life. The young lady, in turn, met him in a past life when she was only 14 years old. Antonia thought that perhaps because she had sent the head maid away faster, he had arrived earlier. Martina handed the letter to the young lady. Antonia looked closely at the contents. Her uncle wanted a man to be sent to her as a tutor. The young lady, in turn, understood that he was indeed a tutor, but even if he taught well, he was still a traitor. Antonia knew the main reason why he came here, because he had some plan with her uncle, and now he was hiding here because they were being chased. The young lady was puzzled and she wanted to leave right now, but still she knew that she needed to be patient. She knew that when her uncle returned, everything would become even worse. Martina looked at the man in surprise and asked if he was the young lady's tutor. The man smiled and said that this was exactly the case, and that in the future he would teach the young lady a lot. Antonia looked at him and said with a smile that he should take care of her properly. The man smiled and said that he would definitely do it. Lorena froze in place when she saw the man. She was trembling with fear. The young lady thought for a moment, as she had barely managed to escape from classes since the first day. But she was glad that Martina had reacted quickly. The young lady thought that even if he was a good educator, he must be good at his job. And in truth, all his activities would only help some kind of swindler. Although she had seen many of them in her life, she knew that the fact that he had come early was a sign that everything was fine with her for now. The lady sighed heavily, as she felt very sorry that nothing could be done about it. Lorena looked at her mistress and called her in a trembling voice. The young lady looked at the maid in bewilderment. She saw that something was bothering her. Antonia came closer to the maid and asked what was wrong. The young maid was trembling and had tears in her eyes. She did not know how to start the conversation. The maid asked her mistress if she could not just throw Mr. Burton out. The young lady looked at the maid in bewilderment. She came closer to her and asked what happened and why she was so upset. The maid was trembling and crying. She could not utter a word. Antonia told the maid to calm down a little and tell everything that was connected with the mister. The maid was trembling and crying. She said that she did not want to lose my lady at all. The young lady looked at her in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about. Antonia asked the maid why she was afraid of losing her. Lorena was shaking and saying that Mr. had treated her sister badly. She said that he had killed her sister. The young lady stood there in bewilderment. She looked intently at the maid who was crying. Antonia looked intently at the maid and asked what she was talking about and how exactly he killed her sister. Lorena said that she did not want to lose her mistress at all, just like she did not want to lose her sister. The young lady came closer to the maid and asked her to calm down a little and speak more slowly. She said that she would certainly listen to her story. The maid looked at her mistress with an intent gaze. She was glad that she wanted to listen to her. After some time, the maid began to tell her story. Lorena said that 6 years ago, Mr. Burton helped the church workers in their village and sometimes taught children arithmetic and the alphabet. The young lady looked at her in bewilderment and asked if he was really a teacher. The maid said that this was exactly how it was, since children from poor families like them could not afford teachers, so her parents sent her and her sister to him. They all trusted Mr. Burton because he worked for free and taught children. He said that people from the church helped him when he was young. The young lady thought for a moment, as she understood that he had been much kinder before than he was now in the Count's estate, but she understood that he could not do such a thing without a reason. The maid said that in the mountains behind their village there was a small waterfall. It was small, and there were rumors that there could be dangerous animals there. The maid sighed heavily and said that, fortunately, these rumors remained just rumors. Also, edible fruits and flowers grew near the waterfall, and parents often allowed their children to play there. All the villagers knew about that place, but they did not know that magic crystals grew inside the waterfall. The maid said that Mr. Burton grew up in their village. Only later did he find out that there were magic crystals there. Lorena looked at her friends with tears in her eyes and said that Mr. Burton needed a girl who could collect these crystals. The young lady looked at the maid in bewilderment and asked if it was really her sister. The maid sighed heavily and said that it was true. She said that her younger brother was then ill, and Mr. Burton lured his sister by telling her that he would give her medicine that could cure her brother. The young girl believed him and brought him a mystical, precious flower that had grown from the powers of the fountain. The maid said with tears in her eyes that if it had ended like that, she would not have despised Mr. Burton. Her brother was getting worse every day and, unfortunately, was not getting better. But her sister still believed in the best and hoped that her brother would get better. At night, the young lady woke up and did not see her sister nearby. She knew that her sister had been collecting flowers since the morning and putting them next to her brother's bed. Lorena ran to look for her sister. She was very scared and worried because she couldn't find her sister anywhere. The maid said that she thought that in this way she wished her brother a speedy recovery. But everything was not so, since her sister was helping Burton, since he said that he would give the medicine only when she finished, and she had to work constantly. Lorena cried even more because Mr. Burton then said that if her sister told the others, everything would end and he would not give her the medicine. The young lady looked closely at her maid. She understood that the girl was only 9 years old at the time, and there was nothing she could do. Lorena remembered how sister said that she was completely satisfied with the job, but their brother continued to cry every day, and she, in turn, could do nothing but watch. She said that every morning she went to the hill and watched her sister work at the waterfall, but after a couple of days, a monster suddenly appeared. She saw him then from the hill, but she still clearly remembers the black silhouette. The man angrily pushed the girl away and ran away in a hurry. The maid was furious because she saw her sister fall and the terrible monster towering over her. He abandoned her sister and ran away alone. The young ladies looked at their friend intently and in surprise. They were shocked by this story. The maid said that as soon as she saw this, she immediately ran to her sister. She said that she would save her sister, even at the cost of her own life. Lorena sighed heavily and said that unfortunately she was too slow. She said that there was no trace left of the man, and all that was left of her sister was blood and a ribbon. She was shaking and crying, as it was hard for her to remember that time, but she still continued her story. She said that she returned in tears and told everything to her parents and the villagers, but by then the man had already left the village. Then she went to the church to talk. The young lady in turn knew that the church could not help but know about this incident. The young lady, in turn, thought that it could be possible that the man was giving part of the crystal to the church. Of course, she knew that the church considered magic crystals blasphemous, but in turn, they were expensive. Besides, she realized that no one had said anything about the beast, and she thought that perhaps it was the church that had allowed the man to escape. The maid said that her younger brother, whom her sister wanted to save, also soon forgot about the man. Her parents scolded her for protesting in the church, but she could not do anything about it. Lorena, trembling with fear, told her mistress not to be left alone with him. Lorena looked at the lady intently and said that she would kill him with her own hands. She said with fury that no one was allowed to touch him except her. She trembled and said that she should have done it back then, but she was small and stupid. The young lady looked at the maid and said in a gentle voice that everything was fine. She looked at her intently and said that she didn't have to kill him at all. The maid asked if she was really saying that one should not take revenge. The young lady sighed heavily and said that this was not true, and she was not telling her at all that she should not take revenge. The maid looked at her mistress in bewilderment. She did not understand what she was talking about. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she was saying that there was no point in taking revenge on him when she could also suffer. Antonia said that she would help her in this matter. The maid looked intently at her mistress. She was surprised by such words. A moment later, she came to her senses and told her mistress that this could not be done, since Mr. Paul had sent a man to them, and she knew that he could harm the mistress. The young lady said it wouldn't happen again. Antonia said that if she meant he was going to be a replacement for the head maid, it would be easier for him to deal with her directly. Unfortunately, Antonia didn't know Lorena's story, but Mrs. Mills and Formis had a different relationship with her uncle. Formis wasn't as blindly attached to her uncle as Mrs. Mills because he wasn't loyal to him, since when she presented evidence, he offered her a deal. She decided to put into action a bold plan to remove her uncle and take over the management position. But, of course, then she told her uncle everything, and he kicked the man out. But now the maid's story confirmed her suspicions. She understood that the man loved money very much and was ready to do anything for it. The lady looked closely at her maid and said that now she knew more about the man. The maid smiled and thanked her mistress for the conversation. She looked closely at the maid, for her story had struck the young lady to the depths of her soul. And now she knew better the man who would be filming next to her. She understood that thanks to the story of the maid, she could hate the man even more than before. She was partly glad to see him again, but if there had not been such a scoundrel as him in her past life, she would not have been able to cope with him now. The young lady looked closely at her maid and smiled and told her not to worry as everything would be fine. The young lady looked closely at the mirror, taking a simple dress. She wanted to look as pitiful as possible. The maid looked at the young lady with surprise and puzzlement and asked if she really wanted to wear a cheap suit like before. The young lady thought for a moment and said that it was so. The maid was puzzled and did not understand why the lady decided so. She told her mistress that she was still very beautiful, that even now she looked great. The young lady sighed heavily. She knew that the fact that her uncle was hiding was helping her a lot right now. He wrote to her to put on a dress and shoes, but she saw the dress and decided to do it her own way. The young lady looked at the maid and asked if she had heard the story from yesterday about what the gentleman had done to their friend. The maid looked at the young lady in surprise and asked if she was trying to deceive Mr. Burton. The young lady said that she was, and she would pretend to listen to him. She said that she would tell her uncle everything, but she must be careful on the first day. The maid sighed heavily and agreed with her mistress. The young lady, in turn, knew that she really liked to dress in ordinary clothes. She knew that she had to throw out a good bait first, so that the man who loved money so much would shake her uncle's hand. She wanted to force him to seduce the Count's young and defenseless niece, and to put pressure on him. The young lady looked at the maid and told her to wait a little. The maid looked at her mistress with puzzlement and said that she would wait, but also asked her to be careful. The young lady greeted her teacher with a smile and said that she was very glad to see him. The man smiled and told her to come in, but he called her darling. The young lady looked at the man intently. She was very glad that she was wearing gloves. She was shocked that he dared to hold the girl's hand and carry her, even though he was just a teacher. She knew that this contact was not necessary. She restrained herself as she wanted to kick him, but now she had to hold on to him as she needed something from him. Antonia knew that the man knew her uncle's weaknesses. She knew that she needed to look for opportunities for revenge. She thanked him with a smile and said that she felt like a grown lady. The teacher looked at the young lady in surprise. Antonia smiled, looking at the man, and said that this was the first time that someone had seen her off, except her father. Mr. Burton smiled and said it was an honor for him, as he was her first escort. The young lady timidly said that it was a great honor for her too. Mr. Burton looked at her in surprise and asked if that was true. The young lady said shyly that he was a very nice man. Mr. Burton smiled and said that he was just an ordinary teacher, but he was still very glad that she thought so. The young lady looked at him sharply and told him not to speak like that, as he was her teacher, and her uncle had sent him to her. Antonia smiled and said that she was now sure that he was an excellent teacher. When he mentioned her uncle, she showed a little fear. The young lady hoped he noticed it. From that day on, throughout the training, she behaved very carefully. She just collected a little information about him and flattered him, this lady said with a smile, that he holds a pen very beautifully. She sighed heavily and said that no matter how hard he tried to hold her back, she still couldn't pee normally, skirtin', and said that she did as he said, and everything worked out for her. The young lady looked at the teacher and said with a smile that she had solved the problem correctly for the first time. She saw that the teacher's self-esteem had increased due to certain moments, and she knew that her temporary work had worked perfectly. Mr. Burton was furious because he realized that his fun was cancelled. He wanted to come to the estate and play with the beautiful maids, but the manager was too strict. He was puzzled because he could not even talk to her and the other maids, since everyone was busy with their work the first time he saw the manager, but he did not like her right away. But in turn, he was glad that it was very easy to teach the young lady, since he heard that she was very naive and gentle. He understood that she was very much looking forward to affection, and he saw that when he smiled at her, she was very happy about it. Mr. Burton realized that the young lady was very convenient for him, since she was very attentive. He did not need to repeat the information again. The young lady looked at Mr. Burton with embarrassment and said that her mother had told her that she should be grateful to the teacher for his work. She smiled and said that thanks to him, she understood this book. She smiled and said that she would like to give him a gift. Antonia said that her uncle pays him very generously for his hard work. The young lady looked at the teacher intently and thanked him with a smile. Mr. Burton looked at her with a smirk, as he realized that she was an excellent student. He knew that the young lady had said she had nothing other than the things of the previous counts, and he realized that it seemed she really had nothing. He saw that the clothes she was wearing were already too small for her. He thought that the count seemed to be broke. He also thought that the manager was trying to distract him from watching the maids. But he noticed that the manager had left her a sweet lady. He knew that she would give everything she had, and he noticed this. but still he knew that although she was only a little girl, she looked more like the role of an earl than her uncle. He knew that the Count would not be able to return for several more months. Mr. Burton knew that the Count was just a fool who trusted him. He wanted to fix up the entire estate in the given time. Mr. Burton looked at the young lady intently and asked her why she was dressed like that, as it was getting very cold. The young lady looked at him in bewilderment and asked what he was talking about. The young lady hesitated, not knowing what to answer. He looked at her intently and said that he had seen her just recently. Mr. Burton said that she was his only student who always wore strict, shabby clothes. Antonia looked at the teacher intently and said that there was nothing wrong with that, and that she did not care at all about her appearance. Mr. Burton looked at the young lady intently and said that his heart was broken. Antonia looked at him in bewilderment and asked what he was talking about. He looked at the young lady and said that he had been to many places in his life, but had never seen a girl sweeter and more beautiful than her. Antonia was surprised, as she did not expect him to say something like that. She looked at him intently and asked if he really thought that. She said he would never say anything bad to her. Mr. Burton looked at her and asked if she really thought he was lying to her. He said that it was not so. In turn, he knew that he was now half sincere with her. Mr. Burton, in turn, traveled all over the country in search of a way to make money. He was sure that the young lady would be welcome everywhere. Now he saw that just one look from her made him look back at her again and again. He saw that although the young lady wore cheap shoes and shabby clothes that were more suitable for a servant, nothing could mar her beauty. Mr. Burton, in turn, recently remarked that the young lady was incredibly modest. Mr. Burton looked at the young lady closely and smiled as he told her to look at the catalog of clothes. He smiled as he told her to look at the beautiful figures, and also asked her if she would like to wear something like that. The young lady looked at the teacher intently. She did not know what to answer. Mr. Burton knew that the young lady had probably never seen something so beautiful and luxurious in her life. He knew that the young lady lived in a place that was quite far from the capital. The young lady hesitated and said that the outfits from the catalog were very beautiful. Burton smiled and asked if she would like this outfit for herself. Antonia looked at the teacher in surprise and timidly said that she would be happy, but unfortunately, her uncle said that she should not stand out at all, as it would only bring shame on her. The man thought for a moment, because he thought that this was a very interesting train of thought. He realized that he could definitely handle her, and it didn't matter to him whether she was rich or poor now. He knew that he was not at all in poverty, since he always had clients in the form of children from different villages. He knew that in this he was very different from her uncle. Mr. Burton knew that her uncle could not handle an adult, but he only dealt with children, unfortunately. In his past there was one girl who died due to an unfortunate coincidence. Then magic crystals were quite cheap. Mr. Burton, in turn, was very sorry, since he had to give more than half of his earnings to the church so that they would remain silent. He came closer to the young lady and said with a smile that a couple of dresses would be enough for her. The young lady looked at him in surprise. He smiled and asked if she wanted them. She hesitated and said that, unfortunately, her uncle would not allow her to buy the outfits. Mr. Burton looked at the young lady intently and asked why she didn't ask him. Antonia looked at him in bewilderment and asked what he was talking about. Mr. Burton knew that everything was going as it should, and he would not be like her uncle at all. He knew that her uncle was a complete fool, since he knew that gingerbread would be better than a rod for such a young and beautiful girl. He smiled and said that he would not tell her to her uncle, and he would not know anything at all if they did not tell him. The young lady looked timidly at the teacher and said in a trembling voice that the doctor was very bad. Mr. Burton said that the Count would forgive such a sweet lie. He asked the young lady if she didn't want to show all her beauty to her uncle. Antonia looked at the teacher in bewilderment and asked if she should really tell her uncle that. The teacher smiled and said that everything was correct and he was sure that her uncle would be amazed by her beauty. Mr. Burton asked why she didn't update her wardrobe. He smiled and said that sometimes lying is only beneficial and there is nothing wrong with that. The young lady looked at him timidly and asked if he was sure he would not tell her uncle about this. He smiled and said that it was so, and asked if she believed him. He asked if he looked like a bad person. The young lady was taken aback and said that this was not true at all and that he was very kind to her. Mr. Burton smiled as he looked at the young lady and said that she should trust him about this reason, and he would never deceive her. Antonia looked at him intently but did not answer. But a moment later, she said that they could call Madame from the dressing room. Mr. Burton said that it was a very good idea, as he also wanted to take something for himself. The young lady timidly said that in that case, she would help him out with a present. Mr. Burton looked at the young lady intently As expected, she was very eager for affection. He realized that she did not know people who were kind to her. He was glad, as he knew that a bonus was waiting for him, and he would have a new suit. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she was afraid, and would now wear hats. The maid looked at her mistress in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about. The young lady plopped down on the sofa and sighed heavily, as she knew that 10 days of school had already passed, but school was harder than she thought. The young lady, in turn, did not think that she would have enough patience, since every time he touched her hand or stroked it with her, she really wanted to remove his hand. She understood that her plans could easily fall apart because of this. The young lady looked intently at the maid and told her to call Madam into the dressing room. The maid looked closely at the young lady and asked if Mr. Burton was sure he wanted to buy clothes. Antonia said that was exactly it. The young lady in turn knew that it took longer than she thought. She knew that he was very obsessed with money, that she thought he had taken the bait, but he turned out to be more persistent. She thought that her childhood memories were still hindering her. Unfortunately, she was abandoned at the age of 10. Mr. Burton said that he was a teacher, and then he looked very smart and intelligent. Unfortunately, she always tried to take the best side of things, but now her obedience and generosity are working to her advantage. She knew that he was looking for his own benefit in everything. The young lady looked closely at the maid and said that if she treated him like a good person, she would be in danger. The maid looked closely at the young lady and said that she was doing well, as she did not think that Mr. Burton would fall for her trick so easily. The young lady, in turn, knew that if she had not had experience from her past life, nothing would have worked out for her. She knew that if he himself had not suggested that she betray her uncle, then nothing would have come of it now. Mr. Burton had never been faithful to her uncle, but she was sure that he would try to convince him otherwise. The young lady said that she very much hoped that Madam had done well. The maid looked at the young lady intently and asked if she could trust her. Antonia looked at the maids intently, but did not answer. The madam looked at the young lady and said with a smile that she was responsible for her words, and for this reason she could safely turn to her for help. The madam said that the young lady could completely trust their dressing room. The young lady knew that Madam had not said these words without reason. She knew that the rumors that Madam had spread about the head maid had benefited her. She knew that it was very good to have a trusted person, especially when he was outside the estate. Antonia knew that if something happened, she would have a hard time. She knew that she did not have to wear old dresses and create problems in order to deceive her teacher. She knew that just 2 years ago, her uncle did not force the servants to trust him. Even the former head maid, who had worked for him for a long time, appropriated some of the property for herself. She knew that her teacher's letter would definitely not convince him. So she knew that she had to write a letter to her naive and kind uncle, and her letter would be full of polite words. The madam looked at the young lady and said with a smile that they had not seen each other for a long time. Madam told Antonia that she had grown a lot while she was away. She said that she wanted to take new measurements and sew the perfect outfit for her. Madam smiled and told the young lady that she looked absolutely gorgeous. The young lady knew that Madam was now doing exactly what she wanted her to do. The young lady sighed heavily. She knew that Madame had never let her down and hoped that this would continue in the future. Antonia thanked Madame with a smile for coming to her. Mr. Burton looked at Madame closely and introduced himself with a smile, and also asked Madame if she was the one responsible for Antonia's outfits. He looked at the madam with a grin and said that he was responsible for the young lady's upbringing. He said they needed dresses worthy of her greatness. Mr. Burton said, "Madam, that he had great confidence in her and her skills." The madam looked closely at the teacher and wondered if he really wanted to show off his skills in front of the young lady. The madam looked at him with a smile and said that of course the young lady would wear her outfits and she would try to make them perfect. She looked at the teacher and asked if he could help her. Mr. Burton looked at the young lady closely and said with a grin that of course he would help, as he had promised to pick out a beautiful outfit for her. The young lady looked closely at the teacher and said with a smile that I trust only him. Mr. Burton looked at her in surprise, but in turn, he was glad that she trusted him so much. Mr. Burton looked at Madame with a puzzled expression and asked if she could not vouch for the lady. He said that the young lady was not interested in fashion. The young lady looked at the teacher in surprise and timidly said that maybe the outfit just didn't suit her. The teacher looked closely at the young lady and said that everything was fine and she didn't need to blame herself at all. Mr. Burton looked at the young lady and said with a smile that he was her teacher and would certainly help her. Antonia looked closely at Mr. Burton as he looked like he had it all figured out after looking through a couple of magazines. She knew that he only knew about lies and deception. She wondered if she should tell him that he was a real charlatan. Mr. Burton pointed to one of the options and said that he would like to change the style a little, and also asked if he remembered correctly that this outfit was popular in the capital. The young lady, in turn, knew that it went out of fashion 2 months ago, but she wanted to see the reaction, madam. The young lady saw that madam always smiled even after such meaningless remarks. Madam said that it seemed that Milady's teacher had a different point of view, but she would make a dress that would suit Milady. Mr. Burton looked at madam and said that if she felt that he had been rude to her, then he apologized for it. He said that he only wanted the best for the young lady. She looked at him closely and said that she completely agreed, and also asked if he could step out for a while. Madam said that the young lady had grown a little and needed to take new measurements. Mr. Burton was surprised and looked timidly at the young lady. Mr. Burton, in turn, expected an answer from Antonia, but she remained silent. Antonia looked intently at her teacher, who had earlier said that he would buy her a new dress. It was a crazy idea on his part. She knew that she had to do him a favor in return. Antonia looked at Madame and said that she wanted to give the teacher a gift for his loyalty. She looked at the teacher and asked if he didn't mind, who said that she doubted that she had as good taste as he did, but also pointed to one design and said that she really liked it. Mr. Burton looked at her closely with a smirk on his face, as he expected her to give him a bigger gift, but he also noticed that the outfits were very expensive. He looked at the young lady with a grin and said that he was very glad that she thought of him and cared about him so much, so the outfits were not bad, and Reuben was a little out of place, but there was nothing wrong with that. The young lady timidly asked for forgiveness. The teacher smiled and told the young lady that everything was fine and she had nothing to worry about. He also chose the most expensive suit for her. The young lady, in turn, knew that he had chosen for her an outfit that had long since gone out of fashion. But knowing this, Madame did everything perfectly. Madame looked at the teacher and said with a smile that he might like other items from the catalog, and they could look at something better. Mr. Burton looked timidly at the young lady and said that in that case, she should call him if she needed anything. The madam looked closely at the teacher and said with a smile that everything was as he said. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she was very sorry. The madam smiled and said that in some ways he was right. Madam said that high-quality rubies were still a bad choice. Madam smiled, looking at the young lady, and said with a smile that she had grown a lot. Antonia looked at her in bewilderment and asked if this was really true. Madam smiled and told her that she seemed to have even gained a little weight, and she was very glad that the young lady was healthy. Madam smiled and said that she still thought it would be better to reduce the amount of frills and lace in the design. The young lady sighed heavily and told Madam that she could do as she wanted. Madam smiled and said that, unlike Mr. Burton, she was truly flattered by her trust. Madam said that the young lady had very good taste. Antonia thanked Madam. Antonia looked at Madame intently and asked if she had found out what she had asked for. Madame smiled and said that she had found out everything, and it was not difficult. The young lady was glad that Madame was helpful, not only in choosing outfits, but also in finding information. The young lady knew that Madame was connected to a group of informants who operated throughout the county, and she knew that most of the rumors in the county were born in Madame's language. Antonia assumed that Madame was not simply connected to a group of informants, but had a direct relationship with them. Antonia understood that in order for her maid to take revenge, she needed to find out everything about her uncle, so she had to be careful in communicating with the informant. The young lady said with a smile that she was very glad, as she thought she had already found herself in a dead end. Madame said that the informant hides his name in case of danger, and he easily changes his appearance. Madame said that it was not difficult for the informant to understand what was happening, but it would be better for her to know all the details. Madame handed her the documents. The young lady thanked Madame. Madame smiled and said that she was completely at her service, and that this was nothing compared to the grace of the Countess. The young lady looked at Madame in bewilderment, as she did not understand what she was talking about. She said that 10 years ago, when she was younger, her family was starving and on the run, so they turned to the Countess. The young lady looked at Madame in surprise and asked if this was true. Antonia was surprised because every time she met Madame, she saw her bright and majestic, and she thought Madame was always like this. Madame smiled and said that everything was exactly like that, and the Countess liked her sewing skills and she helped her a lot. Madame said that if it were not for the Countess, she would never have been able to sew dresses, even in her dreams, since she simply did not have the means to do so. The Madame smiled at the young lady and said that if there was anything she needed, she would be happy to help her. Madame looked closely at the young lady and said with a smile that the Countess had a daughter, so she was obliged to make a beauty out of her. The young lady, in turn, thanked Madame with a smile. Madame smiled and said that she was grateful to her and would do everything in her power. Antonia looked closely at Madame, and after Madame's words, her heart felt warmer. Antonia was surprised. She didn't even know that her mother had left her such a legacy of trust from those around her. The young lady looked closely at the document. She had a detailed plan of Formis's plans. She understood that the case with Lorena had much more details. She knew she had 2 places that would help her with Formis. The first was the Viscount's church. The second was the Countess's house nearby. She knew that both places held a great grudge against Formis. She knew that he had stolen many ancient books and other things, and then sold them. He had deceived the Countess's son, the only heir of the family. She knew that he had stolen one of the family heirlooms, and it was the Soul Stone. During the theft, the heir tried to interfere, but in the process of defending himself, he became paralyzed in his legs. She knew that both places would help her, but she also knew that this would be just a formal punishment. Antonia didn't think this would make her maid feel any better. She knew that her servant's younger sister had died because of Formis. She knew that if he couldn't ask for help, couldn't beg, couldn't even run away, then perhaps he would feel the full force of hopelessness. The young lady looked at her maid intently and told her to read the document. The maid looked at the young lady in surprise after reading the document and asked if this was really what was waiting for Mr. Burton. The young maid was shocked. She looked at her mistress and asked if the master would really die like this. She was trembling with fear. The young lady looked at her intently and said that she needed to finish everything else first, and she took her hand tenderly. The maid looked intently at the young lady and thanked her with tears in her eyes. Antonia smiled, looking at her friend, and said with a smile that everything was fine. Mr. Burton looked at the glass of drink and said that he didn't need to drink it, but needed to sell it. A moment later, he turned his gaze to the bottles of alcohol and said that he could drink a little, as there were a lot of them. He had already started to count his profits after he was able to sell alcohol. He looked at the bottle with a smile and said that he should still drink some expensive whiskey. He said with a smile that he was worthy of drinking such alcohol. He said that one would not be enough, since he still had many expensive things. He knew that the basement of the estate was filled with all sorts of different types of alcohol, and this would help him earn a lot of money. He said with a satisfied grin that he still needed to relax a little. He knew that even if he drank all the alcohol, the young lady would still tell him that he looked good. He remembered how she looked at him shyly and thanked him for the outfit he had chosen. He thought it seemed like she didn't even know why she had received such a simple gift. He knew that she had always lived a simple life, but he was furious and did not understand why her uncle was taking it out on her. He understood that the young lady was not joking with him. He remembered her clear, bright blue eyes. He knew that she was just a young girl with a sweet expression on her face. But her eyes did not lie to him. Mr. Burton lay down on his bed contentedly, smiling as he wondered how many times he had had to deal with children. The young lady, in turn, read the documents carefully. She knew that thanks to her cooperation with Madame, she now knew about her uncle's weaknesses, which her teacher also knew about. But she was puzzled by the fact that there was nothing special in the documents. A couple of years ago, there were rumors about a hound who seduced several women and stole all their jewelry. The young lady knew that for this reason, information about the Baroness's affairs quickly spread among the people. Many women called themselves baronesses. She realized that it seemed like he seduced women with his beauty and even married them. She was surprised because she realized that he flirted even with young girls. She saw that the document also contained information about people being accused without reason and without guilt. The young lady, in turn, still wanted to keep the documents, as she thought that someday they would be useful to her. The maid entered the young lady's room and said with a smile that her carriage was ready. Antonia looked sideways at the maid and asked, "What about the teacher?" Polly looked at the young lady and said that the teacher was simply asking questions, namely, what kind of carriage would be used, how many horses would be harnessed, and whether there were enough cushions in the carriage. The maid sighed heavily and said that it was not so easy to serve such curious aristocrats. The young lady in turn sighed heavily, as she knew that the teacher had given her cheap clothes, and she was very disappointed in him. After meeting Madame, the teacher became more picky towards her. He said that he did not have a single jacket that would match the cufflinks that she gave him. The young lady in turn knew that he had deceived her and forced her to buy him very expensive things. The young lady looked at him intently and said that she could buy him another gift. She said he was a very wonderful man and would certainly look great in any clothes. Antonia said that he had a reddish silk hat in his things, but it was not at all suitable for a gentleman like him. The teacher cleared his throat and said that this was, of course, so, since he was the Count's teacher and he needed to dress decently. The young lady sighed heavily and said that when her mother was still alive, she said that grace comes from within. She said that, of course, she had not learned anything yet and could not cultivate dignity in herself. He felt sorry for her old dress. The teacher looked timidly at the young lady. He did not know what to answer her, and therefore hesitated. The young lady, in turn, understood that she could neither agree nor refuse. She understood that even if he said that clothes were important, he had no dignity. Otherwise, he would have no need for this jacket. The teacher smiled and said that when a good person wears good clothes, he shines brighter. He looked at her and said that the cufflinks, tie, all the beautiful things she had given him, decorated his suit very well, and he looked great. The young lady understood that, although he was honest with her, he still only cared about material things. The young lady looked at the teacher and said that even if she tried to invite the lady from the dressing room again, her uncle would punish her. The teacher looked at her in surprise and asked if she didn't believe him. He said that a whole week had already passed, but there was no letter from the Count. The young lady said she wasn't saying she didn't believe him. She was just very worried. Antonia looked at him and asked with a smile if they could go together. The teacher looked at her in surprise and asked what she was talking about. He asked if she was talking about going straight to the dressing room and trying on clothes there. She said that was exactly what she meant, but she had never done it. She said that she would be very glad if he accompanied her on her first walk. He smiled and agreed with her. The teacher, with a sly smile, asked what could be better than a helping hand from him. The young lady looked closely at the maid and said that she and the other servants had done a very good job. The maid looked at her mistress and quietly called her. Polly said quietly, "Young lady, that Mr. Burton thought it was just an ordinary walk." The young lady nodded quietly in response. She knew that all the preparations were already completed. Antonia knew she had enough information, and now that her teacher was out of her uncle's reach, she knew all she had to do was lead him into the black, hot void. As she was leaving the young lady's estate, she stopped, as she was surprised. She did not expect to see Richard in front of her. She looked at him in surprise and asked why he was here. Richard smiled at the young lady and said that he would accompany her today. Antonia looked at him in bewilderment and asked what he was talking about. Martina looked at her and asked with a smile who would allow such a young lady to walk alone. She said that she asked Sir Debbie for a favor. Richard smiled and said that he was very sorry, but the knight had another mission today. Antonia looked closely at her friend and said with a smile that everything was fine, and she, in turn, was very glad that he came. She looked closely at him, although they had not seen each other for a long time. But he was still so handsome. Richard smiled and said that although he was just a student, he would do everything to protect her. The young lady thanked him with a smile. She understood that even though his rifle only contained a tranquilizer, it would certainly help her in her journeys. She knew that the place she was about to go to was very unsafe. The young lady looked closely at her friend and asked how he was doing. She said that the manager had told her his story. Richard looked at her intently and began to speak with a smile. But a moment later, Mr. Burton came out and did not let the young man run to speak. He said with a smile that it seemed they had been waiting for him for a long time. He said that the gentleman needed a lot of time to prepare, and he hoped that they would all understand him. Antonia frowned and looked at the teacher. She realized that he did not even let her get a word in edgewise. Mr. Burton said that it was time for them to go, and the young lady agreed. Mr. Burton looked at them in bewilderment and said that they were only going to the boutique. He asked in bewilderment whether one carriage was not enough. Mr. Burton looked at the young lady closely and said that she had taken a boy her own age with her. He said that if the young lady needed an escort, she would do well to choose a gentleman like himself. Antonia, in turn, understood that he wanted to control not only her, but the entire trip. She knew that in a past life he even proposed to her to marry him. The young lady looked at the teacher intently and asked for forgiveness. He looked at her with bewilderment. Antonia said that she was worried because she was going out for a walk and couldn't wait to visit the boutique, so she decided that he wouldn't mind. But while the young lady was saying all this, she accidentally pricked herself and it was very painful. The teacher looked at her in surprise and asked if she was okay. The young lady timidly thanked him for his concern. She looked at him intently and said that, after all, it was her first time leaving the estate, and she felt uneasy. She also said that they needed another cart to put the clothes in. Mr. Burton's height decreased before his eyes. He looked at her and said with a smile that he understood everything. Mr. Burton said with a smile that his dear elegy had already thought of everything and carefully prepared for the trip. Antonia looked at him intently, as she expected such a reaction. She saw right through him. She knew that if she insisted on Richard being her chaperone, he would not allow it to happen. But still, she knew that the teacher was right, as there was too much preparation for one simple trip. Antonia, in turn, did not want her maid to be near the teacher. Over the past few weeks, she had been trying to organize everything so that the teacher and her maid would not cross paths. She knew that there was a high chance that he could recognize her. She didn't know the whole story of her maid, but she could just pretend to be stupid. She knew that today was a very important day, and she couldn't just let him escape. In the middle of their conversation, the carriage shook violently and they heard a noise. Mr. Burton was shocked and did not understand what happened. The man driving the carriage said in a puzzled tone that there were robbers ahead, and Mr. Burton was shocked and did not understand if this was true. The young lady screamed to her teacher that she was very scared and also asked what they should do. Mr. Burton was trembling with fear. He looked at the young religion with puzzlement and asked why she was asking him about this. He looked at her and said that they could hear everything, so she should sit quietly. He looked at her and in a trembling voice asked if she would not become a countess in the future. The teacher looked at her closely and said that for this reason, she needed to be calmer in such situations. He looked at her and said angrily that if she gave them the money, they would leave immediately. He said that he would stay in the carriage and she should come to an agreement with them. The gentleman looked at her intently and asked if she understood him. The young lady was shocked, as she did not expect to hear such a thing. Antonia looked at him in bewilderment and asked if he really wanted her to negotiate herself. Mr. Burton was trembling with fear. He said that everything was right. She understood. Since she was a noblewoman, and all nobles behaved this way, she did not know if her experience would be enough. But still Antonia knew that she had to try. The young lady looked at the teacher intently and agreed with him. Mr. Burton's face changed in an instant. He was glad that she agreed and said with a smile that it was very good. A moment later, the young lady opened the carriage door with lightning speed, ready to negotiate. She turned around and looked at the teacher intently. She said that she had always been a good listener, and that she was simply an excellent student. A moment later, she screamed in rage, very loudly. She asked her teacher if he was really going to sacrifice her and run away alone. Mr. Burton was shocked. He looked at the young lady intently and asked why she was doing this. A moment later, a young stranger entered the carriage. She looked intently at Mr. Burton and said with a smile that they had not seen each other for a long time. And she also called Mr. Burton sweet. Mr. Burton was in shock. He did not understand why all this happened to him. He did not understand how Tenon ended up in such a place. The leader of the guild and the Eastern assassins, the silent Tenon herself, was in front of them. Mr. Burton was shocked because he knew that she had fallen in love with him a couple of months ago. He did not understand what she was doing in such a place. He was shaking with fear. She looked at him closely and said with a smile that he was now in a nice carriage, and also asked what he was carrying. He was very scared. He looked at her and asked what she wanted to do. Tenon looked at him closely and asked what was wrong. She said with a smile that he left a trace of gunpowder on her, and it was such an exciting night that he could not even forget it. Tenon waved a dagger at the man. Mr. Burton was getting more and more expensive. He was afraid. He knew that even if she jumped out of the window, she would catch up with him. He understood that they could resist her. He thought the best idea would be to hide behind the young lady. Mr. Burton, in turn, knew that she loved money very much, as he did. He hoped that the young lady would give her all the money, and then she would listen to them. He knew that the young lady, in turn, was very obedient and was sure that she would trust him and save him. Mr. Burton was shaking with fear. He looked closely at the young lady and wondered what was wrong with her. He did not understand why she had such a stony expression on her face. He was shocked because he realized that after the first reaction she was silent. He did not understand why this happened. He felt that there was a dead silence in the carriage, the silence in which a predator takes aim at its prey. He knew that wherever she appeared there was pitch silence, which is why she was called the Silent Tenon. Mr. Burton looked at the young lady closely and said that she should have talked to the woman. He thought it was just a crazy situation and wondered if she was really that naive. Mr. Burton looked at her closely. He knew that her face was usually pale, but now it was not like that. Mr. Burton was trembling with fear and said that it was not he, and that he was simply helping the young lady and had not deceived her uncle at all. The young lady looked at her teacher intently and asked if he had not taught her to lie and deceive. The young lady, without taking her eyes off the teacher, said that it was he who taught her to walk and cheat when necessary. The teacher froze in place. He looked at her trembling with fear. He did not understand what she was talking about. He did not understand how she could speak about him like that. A moment later, Tenon threw a dagger at Mr. Burton, who froze a few centimeters from the teacher's face. Mr. Burton screamed in a way he had not expected. Tenon came closer to him and said with a smile that she had not seen him for a very long time. She asked with a smirk if he could take his eyes off her. Moments later, she took the dagger back. He trembled as he looked at her and asked her to stop. But a few minutes later, she still threw another dagger at him. Burton looked at the dagger in fear. She smiled and said that it was so long ago that she had already forgotten, but still he was very good at dodging her blows. She slowly walked closer to him. Mr. Burton was very scared and shouted for her to stay put. The young lady looked at them intently. She knew that if this were happening not in a carriage, but in the square, she would be clapping with joy. Antonia saw Tenon throwing knives and was close enough to dodge, but she knew there was no point in dodging because he would die at her hands sooner or later. She looked at him intently and asked if he was telling her to stop. Mr. Burton asked her to stop in a trembling voice. Tenon looked at him in surprise. The young lady, in turn, watched them closely and noticed that her eyes were like sharp blades. She's seen a lot of bad guys before, but this is the first time she's seen a killer who's like a perfectly forged weapon. She looked at the young lady and asked if she wanted to say anything. Antonia, in turn, said that she had no desire to say anything. Tenon said with a smile that this was very good. She smiled and said that she wanted to create a monopoly, so she would not let her victim go. She flashed the dagger at Mr. Burton again. The man jumped back in a hurry. He was scared and covered in sweat. The young lady looked at her with confusion and asked what she was talking about. Tenon looked at the young lady intently and said that she was still too young to understand such things. Tenon looked at the young lady and asked if she really wanted to hand Mr. Burton over to her personally. Antonia sighed heavily and said that she did. Tenon came closer to him and asked how he was. Mr. Burton was trembling with fear. He begged her to stop and not to harm him. Trembling with fear, he looked at her and said that she liked his face. She looked at him intently and said that it was true, and she remembered that she had fallen for his face because of her utter stupidity. A moment later, she showed him her scar and asked if he could see it. The young lady froze in place. She stared at the deep and terrible wound. She knew that Mr. Burton had given her this wound with a bullet as he was trying to escape. She knew that in a way he had done a great job, since he had faced the killer one-on-one, taken the money, and even managed to escape. She looked at him intently and said with a smirk that he does not learn from his mistakes at all, and she is very disappointed in him. Tenon looked at him intently and said that she had already told him earlier that if he wanted to kill her, he should have done it right away. Trembling with fear, he said that he loved her. He said that he did this because he loved her. Tenon looked at the gentleman and said that she also loved him, so she would not kill him right away. She said that she would certainly let him breathe a little more. Mr. Burton was trembling with fear. A moment later, she raised the axe over his head. He was in shock because he did not want to die at all. A few minutes later, he crashed out into the street, knocking down the door and breaking the window of the carriage. Tenon looked at the man closely and said with a grin that he was very lucky. She slowly walked towards him and did not say that his luck had already run out. She said that he should have cut her throat back then. Mr. Burton looked at her and said in a trembling voice that there was a misunderstanding. Tenon looked at him intently and asked if he was seriously talking about a misunderstanding. Mr. Burton said in a trembling voice that he had not even touched her vital organs. Tenon, in turn, looked at him with a grin, but did not answer. Mr. Burton realized that he could live, and in the blink of an eye, his face changed, and he looked at her with a smile. He understood that if you could earn her trust, who could even deal with the ungrateful girl who betrayed him? A moment later, she grabbed him by the clothes and pulled him towards her. Tenon asked furiously if he really thought she was that stupid. She said with fury that she listened to his every word. He had said earlier that they would live together forever. He had told her that she would do whatever she wanted and he would definitely make her life better. Mr. Burton shouted furiously that he would fix everything. He understood that he was in a hopeless situation. She looked at him with a smirk and said that it was too late. A moment later, she threw a dagger at him. Mr. Burton froze in place. He was very much afraid for his life. Tenon! She looked at him and said that it was too late and she was going to kill him in the slowest way possible. Mr. Burton was in shock. He was shaking with fear with tears in his eyes. The young lady, in turn, knew that she should still abandon the carriage. She knew that it was not so scary, since she was big, scary, and beaten. Lorena rushed to the young lady and asked if he was okay. Antonia said with a smile that she was okay, and also asked where the other servants were. The maid sighed heavily and said that everyone had escaped as she had expected. The young lady smiled and said that everything had turned out as she had thought. She had previously thought that Tenon, the killer, would help her eliminate Mr. Burton. She knew that Tenon would be good at this task. She knew that she had slowly dealt with everyone. But still, there were servants who were disloyal to her left in the estate. Antonia said she was going to the boutique. She decided to take the servant who had been unfaithful to her with her. She knew that if their carriage was attacked, they would run away with the very first ones, so she screamed. The young lady knew that everything had gone exactly according to her plan, and she was very happy about it. Antonia looked closely at her maid and said that if she wanted to deal with the mister herself, then she could go to him now. The maid sighed heavily and said that that was enough for her. She said she heard his trembling screams and agony, and that was more than enough for her. She said that was what she needed. Lorena looked at the young lady and said that she didn't want them both to suffer because of someone like him. Antonia looked at her maid and said with a smile that this was a very good idea. Antonia knew that no matter what kind of revenge motivates a person, it takes great determination to kill other people. She knew that this situation would remain in her heart for the rest of her life. The maid looked closely at her mistress and thanked her with a smile. Lorena told the young lady that it was time for them to leave. Antonia agreed with her. In exchange for Mr. Burton's life, Tenon decided not to touch her, which meant the woman could very well change her mind and come back for her. The young lady knew that she was, first of all, the chief assassin and had killed many people throughout her life. But at the same time, the young lady knew that Richard was there nearby. She understood that if they were late, he might suspect something. Mr. Burton screamed and begged her to stop. Tenon looked at him in surprise and asked if he didn't like the way she expressed her love. A young lady passed by their fight. Antonia was glad that he got what he deserved. A moment later, Tenon looked at the little lady and asked where she was going. Antonia turned around in confusion. Turning around, she was dumbfounded as she saw that the dagger was frozen at her throat. The young lady was in shock and did not understand how this happened, as a few seconds ago she heard the screams of her teacher. Antonia looked closely at the woman. She wondered if she had changed her mind. Antonia knew that the document given to the informant said that she was very fond of expensive things. Tenon looked at the young lady with a smirk and asked if she really thought she would get out of here alive and unharmed after seeing the killer's face. The maids looked at the young lady with fear and shouted at her. Tenon looked at the young lady with a smile and, asking for forgiveness, said that it was just her job, Antonia. In turn, did not answer. She understood that, of course. She could talk to the killer and say that everything was not like that at all. But she understood that the killer would not listen to her, no matter what she said. Antonia knew that for him, she was just a small aristocrat who owned a fortune. But, of course, just in case, she had prepared something that might interest her. Antonia would have liked to say something, but did not have time. A moment later, she saw Richard on the roof of the carriage. Richard presented a gun and aimed it at Tenon, barely containing his anger. He told her to take her hands off right now. Tenon looked at Richard with a smirk and asked if he thought she couldn't dodge it. Richard looked at her intently and said that it was so. Tenon smiled and said that he was very self-confident. She looked at him and said that they could try and see who was right. She froze. Looking at Richard, she saw in his eyes the rage he was holding back. She wanted to tell him something, but he interrupted her before she could say a word. He angrily told her to just leave the young lady quietly, and then he would let her live. Tenon laughed as she looked at the young lady. A moment later, she said she agreed. It was published. She sighed heavily and said that she was already removing her hands, and also asked if he could lower the gun that he was shining in front of her. Richard looked at her with fury and told her to move away from the young lady first, as he needed to be sure that my lady was safe. She sighed heavily and said that they were little children and simply adorable. Tenon looked closely at the young lady and said that she was very funny, as she did not even blink an eye when a knife blade was held to her throat, and also a very funny young man who was threatening her fiercely. Richard looked at the young lady and told her to get into the carriage immediately. Antonia agreed with him. The young lady looked at the maid. Polly looked at her mistress and said that Richard had said that he would guard them. Antonia sighed heavily and said that this was very good. She knew that just a short time ago her completely calm heart now felt as if it would jump out of her chest. She knew that she had to calm down quickly because she didn't want her maids to worry about her. She didn't want them to see that she was very scared. Tenon sighed heavily and said with a smile that she thought she would lose her ear. The man came closer to her and asked if she would order him to pursue them. She smiled and said that there was no need for that, since there would be no bones left of them. The man looked at her in bewilderment and asked what she was talking about. She smiled, looking at the man, and told him that it would be better for him to burn the cart. He was surprised by such an order. She said that it was necessary to clean up properly. She sighed heavily and said that she had been doing this kind of thing for a long time, but she was still weak when it came to children. The man smiled and said that it was very surprising, since it was not at all her style. A moment later, they had already set fire to everything in the carriage. Tenon stared intently at the burning carriage. Tenon thought for a moment, wondering if the young lady knew that the young man was much more dangerous than her. Then she felt that he could blow her head off. That moment when he took aim, he planted a disgusting picture in her head. For a second, she even thought that she was already dead. She wondered who he really was. Tenon knew that people with such skills did not serve as ordinary knights in simple families. She did not understand why he was wrong around the young lady. She thought that she was unlikely to find an answer now. No matter how much she thought, she wanted to shake all the information out of Burton. Tenon looked at the man closely and said that he was apparently their only prey today. The man asked if she really wanted to let him live. She looked at him with a smirk and said that it was not so. She said that she would definitely play with him for a few days and then give him the most painful death. She looked at her subordinate and told him to take the man, since it was time for them to leave. Martina looked at the young lady with a puzzled expression. She said that her young lady still had not returned, although a long time had passed. Martina, with tears in her eyes, told the young lady that she had been very worried about her and thought that something serious had already happened. Antonia looked at her and said with a smile that everything was fine. Martina sighed heavily and said that she should have gone with the young league after all. Martina looked back and did not see the rest of the servants. The young lady said that they had all run away. Martina was furious. She said that they were traitors. A few minutes later, Martina, smiling, hugged the young lady. She said that everything would be fine, since they were doing their job very poorly anyway, so it would be better to hire someone new. The young lady, in turn, knew that there really were few people left. She thought that she could call someone from those who had been driven out of the estate in the past. She learned that they all left the estate crying. The young lady looked at Martina intently and said that Richard had protected her. Martina sighed heavily and said that it was very good, and she was very happy. The young lady sheepishly agreed with her. She was glad to have such a friend next to her. A moment later, she turned around and saw Richard. She came closer to him and held out a small gift. He looked at her in surprise and asked if it was really for him. Antonia thanked him with a smile for today. Richard looked at the young lady intently, not taking his eyes off her, and for a while they stood silently looking at each other. He smiled and said, "I just did what I had to." Antonia said that this was not true, since he had saved her life after all. A moment later, Richard finally accepted her gift and thanked her. She looked at him intently and said that he could sell the gift to get money if he needed it. He smiled and said that he would keep the gift like the apple of his eye and would not let them take even Debbie's sulfur. She smiled and said that he would be able to show them off from a different angle a little later. She said that she thought that in about 3 years such things would suit him quite well. Antonia thought that in about that period he would already be about 18 years old. The young lady, in turn, knew that the jewelry would suit him in a few years. When he matured, she knew that then he would be a real knight. Although she knew that, given how he had already shown himself, it was quite strange that he wasn't already. The young lady looked closely at her friend. She wondered if something was wrong as he looked a little puzzled. Richard looked at the young lady and said with a smile that it was time for him to go. Antonia looked at him intently and agreed, but also said that if he didn't mind, she would like to have lunch with him soon. Richard looked at the young lady in surprise and asked if this wouldn't be a problem for her. Antonia knew that he was used to living by orders from others. She felt very sorry for him. She knew that it shouldn't be a problem, and the exception would be the return of her uncle, but she knew that was unlikely. She knew that there was no one else to tell about what was happening inside the estate. She smiled, looking at her friend, and said that it would not be a problem, and she would really like to thank him for saving her today. Richard smiled and said that it was a very good idea, and he would then tell Sir Debbie about it. The young lady said with a smile that it was very good. Debbie looked at the Duke and asked what was in the box. Richard told him not to touch anything. Debbie asked the Duke if he had really received a gift from the young lady. The young man quietly approached the box, as he wanted to see what they had given him. But a moment later, Richard hit him on the hand. Debbie looked at the Duke with confusion and asked why he hit him. Richard looked at him angrily and told him not to touch anything. The young man said that he was very interested. He asked the Duke if this was the first time he had received a gift from someone. And not just anyone, but from a girl. He sighed heavily and said that she was still just a girl. Debbie looked at the Duke with a smile and said that, despite her age, she was still a lady. Richard knew that was true. Until today, he had always been wary of absurd rumors, and for this reason had refused any gifts or displays of affection from aristocrats. Richard looked at the young man and said that, since he was so curious, he had better be on his guard. Debbie told the Duke with a smile that he knew perfectly well that he could only say something like that to him. Richard looked at him sharply and said that he was rescinding his decision to raise his salary. Debbie was stunned by such a statement. He looked intently at the Duke and began to beg him not to change his decision. Richard sighed heavily and said that now he would definitely change it. Debbie looked at the Duke intently and said that in that case, he would dance and go wild until he reversed his decision to cancel his salary increase. Richard was shocked. He wanted to throw him out right then and there, but unfortunately, the young man was very good at his job. Richard said that he did not accept the gift so that he could have a good time. Debbie looked at the Duke and asked if these weren't cufflinks and a tie clip. He asked if people didn't give these kinds of things as a sign of warm relations. Richard sighed heavily and said that this was the price for her life. The young man looked at the Duke in surprise and asked what he was talking about. He was shocked and told the Duke that he really hoped the young lady was not hurt. He shouted that he still had to go with him. He was shocked and asked, what if they were attacked by mercenaries? Richard sighed heavily and said that things might have been different if he had gone there with them. Debbie was a little puzzled, as the Duke had said that everything would be fine. Debbie looked at the Duke with concern and asked what had really happened. The Duke hit his friend on the head and told him to forget about everything and that he should also get information about the Eastern Assassins Guild. Debbie was shocked. He looked at the Duke and asked if he was seriously going to continue to protect the young lady despite the huge risk. The list angrily told the young man to shut his mouth and do as he was told. Debbie said, puzzled, that if Lady Treatise found out about this, his head would roll off his shoulders. Richard sighed heavily and said that everything had to be done so that his sister would not find out about anything. The young man was shocked by such a statement. Richard entered the room and sighed heavily. As he had ordered the knight to do this task, he was a little puzzled, as it was completely unlike him. But for some reason, he had this feeling that he just had to do it. It seemed to him that the young lady was in danger, and it seemed to him that she would simply be lost without him. After the young lady's teacher left the estate, she was constantly sick. The young lady sighed heavily, as she knew that Martina had cooked for her with care, but she was still too weak. She was very worried about her future. She was puzzled because she did not think that it would be too hard for her. She knew that she needed to write a letter as soon as possible. The maid looked at the young lady and said that it would be better for her to write the letter after she had rested a little. The young lady, in turn, knew that she had to hurry, as she had to make the first move before her uncle found out about everything. She knew that the servants who ran away as soon as the mercenaries appeared would definitely report everything to her uncle. She understood that if her uncle found out about everything from the servants and very late, he would be very angry. She knew that it was all because he considered the student of a loser charlatan more important than his conscience and help. She understood that she had to come up with some excuse for his return. Besides, she had already thought of what she would write in the letter. My lady began writing the letter with a kind greeting. She hoped he was doing well, and also apologized for not writing for several days. Antonia wrote that, in fact, due to a serious illness, she was so weak that she could not even lift her hand. The maid looked intently at the young lady who was sitting and writing a letter. The young lady, in turn, wrote to her uncle that he was probably very worried about her. She knew she had to change the whole story to make it look like it wasn't her intention to call Madame and buy the teacher a gift. She dripped a little water on the letter because she wanted him to see that she had been crying. The young lady, in turn, knew that her maids had already done everything to ensure that her uncle's puppets heard what she needed, and she wanted to describe the incident with Tenon in such a way that her uncle would be angry exclusively at the mister. She knew that to do this she would have to mix the truth with lies and describe everything in the smallest details. Antonia knew she had to figure out how she had survived and make him feel all the fear of a small child. The maid asked her mistress if she had really written to her uncle that he could return without any hurry. Antonia said that she did not write this, and when will he return? And wrote that she is very much looking forward to his return. Lorena looked at the lady in surprise and asked what she was talking about. The maid asked in confusion why she did that. The maid wondered if her uncle would not arrive earlier in this situation. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she did not think so, since everything would be the other way around. The maid looked at the young lady in bewilderment. She did not understand why she thought so. Antonia said that it was all because she wrote that due to strong emotions, she might again lose the power of speech if he did not return as soon as possible. The maid smiled, looking at the young lady, and said that she had a good idea. Lorena said that for a moment she was even scared, since she had misunderstood her mistress's plan. Antonia knew that, of course, this would not allay all his suspicions. She knew he was not only suspicious, but also incredibly greedy. She knew he was quite smart when it came to such things. Although she hoped that these groundless worries were due to the fact that she was still very young, she, in turn, did not expect much from him, because this was the person who was with her until she became an adult. The lady looked at the maid intently and said that it needed to be sent as soon as possible. She handed her the letter. The maid smiled and told my lady not to worry. Antonia sighed heavily and lay down on the bed. She knew that the new year was coming soon. She thought her uncle would return around that time. She knew that in the new year even the Duke would not be able to pay attention to this estate far from the capital, because he was a member of the imperial family. She knew that in her past life he had helped her, so she wrote to him. But unfortunately there was no news from him yet. She knew that even if he didn't care about her, he could still write to her about it. Antonia, in turn, felt too pathetic to dare send him another letter. She knew that nothing could be done, and she would no longer wait for help from others. She thought that perhaps it was her destiny to become strong, without anyone's help. Debbie looked at the Duke closely and asked what was wrong. Richard sighed heavily and said that his ears were just itchy. The young man said that he had many guesses as to why this was so, and he could even assume that someone might have spoken ill of him. A moment later, the Duke hit him on the leg. The young man was shocked. He asked the Duke what he had done, since now he would not be able to walk normally for several days. Richard looked at him with fury and told him not to talk nonsense. The knight quickly fell silent. Richard looked at him intently and asked if he had found out what he had asked him to do. Debbie looked at the Duke intently and said that it was as if he had asked him to find out one thing. Richard hit him again. Our man looked at the Duke and asked if he could use words. Richard sighed heavily and said that if he used words, the young man would not close his mouth that second. Debbie shouted at the Duke that he could have just asked him again. Richard began to study the information intently, saw that the young man had structured all the information perfectly, and this irritated him greatly. He thought that most likely all his subordinates were like that. Richard said with a smile that it turned out that they didn't have to worry about the guild after all. Debbie looked at the Duke and asked if he hadn't told him about this before. Debbie told the Duke that he had used his ability. Richard thought for a moment, as he felt he had been wrong about her. He knew that the number of people she had failed to crack could be counted on the fingers of one hand. Richard knew they had probably been hounding the informant for the last few days to get anything out of them, but he knew she hadn't been able to get any information on him or Antony. Richard thought that there were apparently two very interesting people in the East. Richard in turn knew that Tenon was an unremarkable person. However, Richard was genuinely interested in this informant. He knew that his relationship with the guild apparently left much to be desired, and at the same time they were unable to shake anything out of him, no matter how hard they tried. He knew that this was the first such unique case, since usually most relationships are either good or even too close. Richard looked closely at the documents and said that this was expected. Debbie looked closely at the Duke and asked if the Archbishop of the capital would not mind. He said that His Majesty had tried to interrogate him many times, but to no avail. Debbie looked at the Duke and asked if this wasn't his chance to perform a feat now. He said that he was talking about His Majesty now. Richard sighed heavily and said that perhaps it was. Richard, for his part, didn't think they would sit back and watch him act. He knew he had another situation to deal with. He knew he had to help Milady, who he thought might disappear. Richard, in turn, felt sorry for her, as she reminded him of someone. For this reason, he decided to stay in a place that was not suitable for him. Debbie looked closely at the Duke and asked if he really wanted to do something right away. The Duke said that the new year was coming soon. Debbie looked at him in bewilderment. Richard said that a call to action letter would definitely arrive soon, and then he would take action. Richard Vuse, in turn, hoped that the young lady would be able to hold out until that time, since, given the information he had looked through, he thought that the dirty deceiver would do something soon. The maids looked at their mistress and said with a smile that she was simply magnificent. Polly told her mistress that all that was left was to tie a bow for her. Polly said with a smile that she felt like she was much more excited about having someone for the first time in a long time. The young lady, in turn, knew that the maids really had reason to be excited today. She knew that today was a special day after all. Polly looked at the young lady closely and asked with a smile on her face if she would do so. The maid timidly asked if the young lady would take a picture with her handsome friend. The maid said with a smile that at this moment her mistress's eyes should look happy. Antonia saw her friend and greeted him with a smile. Richard smiled at the young lady and thanked her for the invitation. Antonia looked intently at her friend. She was struck by his beauty. Richard smiled at her and said that she had done him an honor by inviting them. Richard, looking at his young companion, said that his companion could not come, and he asked to convey his apologies to them. The young lady timidly said that there was nothing to worry about. Antonia sighed heavily as she realized that she was losing her mind again because her friend seemed so incredibly handsome to her every time she saw him. Antonia looked closely at her friend and asked if something had happened. Richard said that it was, since Debbie had an urgent matter a few days ago. The young lady said that everything was fine, since he had already saved her life more than once. She looked at him intently and said that if he had not come, she would have been really upset. Richard smiled and said that this did not happen, and that was very good. Antonia noticed that her friend was smiling especially a lot today, and she wondered if it was all because of her beautiful outfit. She looked at him intently. Antonia, in turn, would have believed it if someone had said that this was a beautiful elf who had come to seduce her. Antonia looked at her friend and said that they should go to the dining room, since Martina had tried especially hard today. Martina smiled and said that, of course, she had prepared only what they liked. She said that she really hoped that they were hungry. Antonia looked at her friend and asked if he liked it. Richard smiled and said that of course he liked it. He said that he was interested, so he tried almost everything, and all the dishes were just delicious. Antonia noticed that Martina smiled, as she was very pleased to hear the praise. Martina smiled and said that she had made orange sorbet and ravioli for dessert. Martina said that if they wanted to say anything else, they could say it. The young lady, in turn, saw that Martina was very pleased, but she was surprised and did not understand why so much had been prepared for them. Martina looked intently at the young people who were eating their food with gusto. She was very glad that they liked everything. The young lady sighed heavily and, looking at her companion, asked if he had also eaten too much. Richard sighed heavily and said that Martina had tried so hard that he felt guilty. Antonia smiled and said that Martina always cooked a lot when something made her happy, and thanks to her, all the servants were well fed. The young lady, in turn, noted that beautiful people even have a beautiful laugh. Antonia thought for a moment, because she knew it would be nice if everything was always so serene and calm. Richard looked at the young lady and said that he wanted to ask her something. Antonia looked at him and asked what exactly he wanted to know. Richard said that behind the bridge, which was difficult to cross, there were precious stones. He asked her whether she would go there alone or ask someone to bring it. Richard said that the person she would turn to would not require payment from her for his help. The young lady, in turn, thought for a moment. She was surprised and did not understand why he was suddenly asking such a question. She, in turn, did not think that this was a question related to business. She understood that he was more interested in whether she would solve the problem herself or turn to someone for help. She knew that in that case, the answer was obvious. She looked closely at her friend and confidently said that she would definitely do it herself. Richard looked at her in surprise and asked why she would do that. He said that the man would not charge her. She looked at him closely and said that it was one thing for a person to want to make a deal right away, but if he said he would help for free, there was a chance he had ulterior motives. Richard looked at her in surprise and said with a smile that a person can say that he does not have them. The young lady sighed heavily, as she knew she was too suspicious to trust anyone just like that. Antonia looked at him intently and asked why he asked such a question. Richard said that he had received a gift last time. She looked at him in surprise and said that it was not a gift, but a sign of her gratitude to him. Richard said that after this, she also sent a decent reward, which led Sir D.B. with slight confusion. She looked at him in surprise and said that this went without saying, since he accompanied her at Martina's request. Richard sighed heavily and said that it was still too much, since she said that it seemed like he had received too much for nothing. Richard said that Debbie said that it would be rude of him to return everything. The young lady looked at him in surprise and asked what he had told her. Richard smiled and said that it was almost New Year's, and he would be gone for a few weeks until the New Year itself. The young lady looked at him in surprise and asked if he would really be gone for 3 whole weeks. Richard sighed heavily and said that he would be gone for 3 weeks. Richard said that his friend had finally received a long-term order, and so he had to go with him. He looked closely at the young lady and said that he would not be able to help if something happened. A moment later, she opened the box and saw a revolver. The young lady was surprised as she did not expect to see such a thing. Antonia was surprised and asked about the task, but she looked at her friend and said that, unfortunately, she did not know how to handle a weapon. In her past life, she had taken part in a couple of hunts instead of her lazy husband, and for this reason, she had learned the basics. She was a little puzzled, since she had read all the information from books, so she had never hit the target. She knew that the bonus was that she would be reproached by her perpetually drunk husband, who knew little more about hunting than she did. Richard looked at her intently and said with a smile that he was going to give her a couple of lessons if she agreed. The young lady looked at him in surprise and asked if he would really help her. She was surprised that he would teach her himself. Richard looked at her in surprise and asked with a smile if she really thought he couldn't teach her. Antonia was taken aback and said that she simply didn't know anything at all, and she was very worried that it would be difficult for him to be with her. She wondered if seeing her awkwardly holding the revolver would cause a shadow of disappointment to cross his handsome face. Richard smiled and said that everything would be fine, since he had already trained a novice shooter before, so she didn't need to worry about such things. The young lady smiled, looked at her friend, said that in that case she would try her best, and called him teacher. Richard looked at her in surprise at the way she called him teacher. The young lady looked at her friend and asked if he didn't like it when she called him that. He sighed heavily and said that he was just remembering his teacher, and his heart was heavy. The young lady looked closely at her friend and said that he was still him. Richard sighed heavily and said that she could just call him by his first name. He smiled and said that then he too could call her not my lady, but Antonia. The young lady looked at her friend with embarrassment, wondering if he always smiled so much. She was sure that Richard was the type of person who always gets what he wants. After all, his charming smile on his handsome face will knock anyone off their feet. Sometime later, the young lady was training with the new gift. Richard smiled and said he thought she was already doing a great job. The young lady looked at her friend intently and said with a smile on her face that it was all thanks to him. Richard smiled and said that it was not so, as he thought she was very capable. Antonia looked closely at the weapon that was given to her. She had previously thought that she lacked talent in this matter, but it turned out that she just needed a good teacher. Antonia looked closely at her friend and asked if he was really leaving the day after tomorrow. Richard sighed heavily and said that that was indeed the case. Richard saw the sad face of the young lady. He smiled and said that she did not need to worry. He said that he would definitely return to her in a month at most. The young lady looked at him intently and asked him sheepishly if it was true. He smiled and said that it was, and also said that if she wanted, he could swear to it. The young lady sighed heavily and said that it was not worth doing, as she did not want to burden him at all. Richard looked at her in surprise, as she did not finish her sentence. Antonia, in turn, was very embarrassed to say this phrase out loud. Richard looked at her and, with a soft smile, asked what was wrong. Antonia looked at her friend and said that her birthday was coming up soon. She said that next month, on the 12th, she was having a party, and she just thought it would be great if he attended. The young lady was surprised. She did not understand why she was so embarrassed. She knew that if all her emotions were now read on her face, she would simply sink into the ground with shame. Richard thought for a moment. The young lady looked at him intently and, taken aback, said that he should not rush about it. She said that he had an important task, both for him and for his companion. The young lady said that whoever Martina might have told her earlier, that they would have to travel quite far. The young lady, in turn, simply wanted to hide somewhere, as her face was burning with shame. She knew that she was not 12 years old, but she could not understand why she was so embarrassed about a birthday that she had not celebrated for several decades. Richard looked intently at his companion and said that he would definitely return for her birthday. Antonia looked at him in surprise and asked if this was true. He smiled and said that there were attacks. Even if she had not invited him, he would have quietly snuck in and secretly congratulated her from everyone. The young lady said that she would definitely invite him when he returned. Richard looked sadly at the young lady. She was surprised, did not understand why he was looking at her like that. She hoped that she still thought that Richard knew something. Debbie looked closely at his master and said that it seemed that my lady had taken care of everything personally, since their horses were in their prime and their coats were very shiny. Debbie asked the Duke with a smile if he thought the servants here were more responsible in their work. He smiled and said that he would like to know the real reason. Richard sighed heavily, looking at his companion. He didn't understand how much longer he could carry on with such nonsense. Debbie looked closely at the Duke and asked if the young lady was aware that the man who taught her shooting was the best marksman in the country. Richard sighed heavily and asked why she needed to know such information. Debbie looked at Richard and asked if when he was teaching him, he didn't express various thoughts that came to his mind. Richard looked at his knight with fury and asked if he really thought it was normal that it took the knight a month to fire a revolver again. Debbie said, puzzled, that it was very difficult, since a sword can simply be drawn and swung, but with a weapon, breathing and reloading are important. Richard did not understand why his companion was so popular in the capital, since he knew that all the girls there knew him. He wanted them to know the truth about him. Richard knew that this was only an outward calm and silence, his false image. He looked at the knight and told him to stop chatting, as it was time for him to go. Debbie looked at his master and asked if he really wanted to say that all the delayed work was his fault. Debbie asked because of whom they had to hurry so much now. Richard shouted and said that this was the reason he was saying that they needed to hurry. Richard struck his companion's horse, causing it to rear up. The young man was surprised and cried out in surprise. He saw his companion rushing off at full speed. Richard, in turn, was very glad that he could finally be in silence. He remembered how the young lady said that she would do everything herself, as she did not want anyone to help her for no reason. Richard, for his part, knew he had done all he could, and now he could just hope that she could handle the rest on her own. Several days had passed since Richard's departure. The young lady's life continued. The maid looked closely at the young lady and said that Madame had come to alter some dresses. Antonia was surprised and asked why Madame had come so suddenly. A moment later, Madame herself entered the room and called Milady, who was a little puzzled. Antonia looked at Madame in bewilderment and asked if something had happened. A moment later, Madame reached out to hand the young lady a letter. Antonia thought for a moment and frowned. She knew that everything had been quiet and peaceful lately. She had learned from an informant that Mr. Burton was dead, and after that, rumors that were in her favor gradually spread. The young lady, in turn, knew that everything could not go smoothly for so long. She knew that, given her life, such a respite was already a luxury she could afford. And the young lady sighed heavily and said that it looked like her uncle was returning. Polly looked at the young lady with concern. Antonia sighed heavily and said that, to put it briefly, it meant that her playing with dresses was over. The maid looked at her mistress with a puzzled look and asked if that was the problem. She was shocked because the young lady was acting quiet and calm. Antonia looked closely at the maid and asked if that was not her biggest problem. Polly sighed heavily and said that it was a very big problem. But if you think about it, the young lady will have to suffer more, and dresses will cease to mean anything to her. She looked at her mistress and asked if she really thought that she loved dresses more than her. The madam looked closely at the young lady and asked if she was sure she would be all right. The young lady sighed heavily and asked if even if there was something wrong with her, what could she change? Antonia said that she didn't really expect to be able to keep him away from the estate for long. She knew that her uncle wasn't some kind of monster. The madam looked at the young lady intently and said with a smile that she was very glad that the young lady in turn was very calm. Antonia looked at Madame and said that however she would need her help. Madame smiled and said that of course she would help in any way she could. Antonia said that she was really to blame, because she heard that the informant was in big trouble. The madam smiled and said that nothing terrible had happened, and on the contrary, the head of the guild found it all quite funny. The young lady was surprised by this statement. The madam smiled and said that everything was correct and she had nothing to worry about. The young lady, in turn, knew that this was becoming more and more curious. The young lady looked at Madame intently and called her with a serious expression on her face. Madame hesitated for a moment. Antonia asked if she was really part of the informant group. Madame froze in place from this question. For a while, the madam sat quietly, looking at the young lady. She did not expect to hear such a thing at all. But a moment later, she looked at her with a smile, and Madame asked her companion if she had been acting too obvious. Antonia smiled and said that it seemed like she was doing it on purpose. She said that she was very worried that this question would cause her some problems. Madame smiled and asked if she hadn't told her. Madame said that whatever the young lady told her, it would remain a secret. Madame said that this is the reason why the guild leader trusts her. Antonia looked at her and asked if she had been waiting for this question all this time. Madame looked at the young lady in surprise and said that she was very perceptive and developed beyond her years. Antonia smiled, looking at Madame, and told her not to say that, as she was terribly ashamed that she had not asked her about it for so long. Madame said that most people, when given a few hints, simply settle for guessing that she is somehow connected to the informants. The young lady was surprised. Madame said with a smile that they just don't have the courage to ask about it. Madame said that some of them considered it shameful to be too closely associated with informants. The young lady, in turn, knew that there were plenty of such aristocrats. She knew that this was especially true for those who used informants in love wars, since many a capital aristocrat had drowned in scandals due to the outbreak of information that should have remained secret. This was especially true for marriages of convenience, which is why she didn't even try if she wasn't sure about the skeletons in her closet. The young lady said that perhaps the chief would now want to meet with her as payment for further information. Madame looked at the young lady in surprise. She asked how the young lady could guess. She told me that she thought Madame would not have mentioned the chapter to her if it were not so. The young lady knew that she also remembered that there were many informants among the heads of the guilds, and she learned that the most famous head in the capital was especially strange, but she did not remember his name. In her past life, she hadn't interacted with informants very often, so it wasn't easy for anyone to remember his name. She remembered that her ex-husband had once talked about him when he had drunk too much. He said that he was too greedy for money. She, in turn, knew that her ex-husband spent huge sums of money to cover up his numerous infidelities. The young lady thought that it would be better for her not to remember this at all, since now she urgently needed to remember his name. She knew that she would have to meet him face to face soon anyway. She looked at Madame intently and said that she agreed to meet him. The maid looked at her mistress with surprise and bewilderment and asked if she was serious about this. The young lady sighed heavily and said that she could only get information by meeting him. The maid was excited. One looked at the mistress and said that she didn't even know what kind of person he was. The young lady said that it was okay, because if he was really dangerous, then Madame would not have offered her this meeting. The Madame smiled and thanked the young lady for her trust. She said that since the young lady wanted it, she would arrange a meeting with the head as soon as possible. The young lady sighed heavily after leaving. Madame, she knew that she still had many issues that needed to be resolved immediately. Antonia knew that in order to prepare for her uncle's arrival, she needed to settle many things. She knew she would be able to make a more detailed plan after meeting with the guild leader. The young lady looked closely at the maid and told her to pass the martini that her uncle would soon be returning to the estate. The maid looked at her mistress and said that she would do everything immediately. Antonia understood that the head was also a very busy man, so the meeting could take place after her uncle returned. The young lady thought exactly that, but their meeting had taken place earlier. The man smiled and said that he was very glad to meet them. The lady, in turn, was very surprised, as she did not expect that they would meet so quickly. The man looked at her closely and said with a smile that he had heard that she was looking for quality jewelry. She saw that he had no intention of saying that he was the head of the Informants Guild in front of outsiders. The young lady looked at him intently, as he looked a little ridiculous. She thought he was quite awkward, as he was dressed in all the formal attire. This manner of speech, posture, and his whole behavior in general led her to the thought that he had to practice acting like this over the past couple of days. The young lady smelled the oil and was a little surprised because she felt that there was something in it. She realized that he tried to cover up this aroma with the scent of perfume. Lust, considering that he works with informants. All this could only be a trap. Yesterday, the madam shared some information with the young lady so that their meeting would go well. The young lady looked at him intently and said with a smile that the new year was coming soon, and madam had told her about it, and she was really looking forward to their meeting. The man smiled and said that he hoped that he could live up to all her expectations. Sometime later, Martina brought them delicious desserts. The young lady looked sideways at everyone present and told them to all leave. The man looked at the young lady in surprise, as he did not understand what she was talking about. The maids looked at the young lady with concern and asked if she was serious about what she was saying, as they wanted to be around her. The young lady said, looking at the maids, that she would be fine and they did not need to worry. A few minutes later, they were left alone. The man looked closely at the young lady and said with a smile that he would have to introduce himself again. He said that he was the head of the Eastern Guild of Informants, and his name was Rufus Croft. She looked at him in surprise and asked if his name was Mr. Croft. He smiled, looking at the young lady, and said that he was very glad to meet them. She remembered her husband, when he was drunk, saying that Rufus Croft took the money every time. She remembered one of the young ladies saying that all information in the empire passed through the hands of Mr. Croft. Young people in society discussed him and said that if you ask him nicely, then no one will ever catch a person red-handed who has done something bad. The young lady heard people say that only he could get any information she needed. The young lady in turn looked closely at the man who was sitting in front of her. Previously, she thought that all this was just fiction, but now she was sure that the rumors were true. She knew that this man, who introduced himself as the head of the Eastern Guild of Informants, would be known for his not-so-good reputation. She knew that it was he who had achieved the fact that people began to resort to the help of informants not only in love wars, but also in other areas. She knew she needed more solid evidence. She didn't think she could jump to conclusions just because he was sweating. She knew that if she voiced her suspicions first, he might just refuse to work with her. He looked at her closely and said that he would like to talk about the information she requested. He sighed heavily and said that, unfortunately, there was not as much information as in the case of Mr. Burton. The young lady looked at him in surprise and asked what he meant by that. She realized that apparently this information would not be enough to definitely erase her uncle from her life. He looked at her closely and said that even if they used all the information they had gathered, the maximum prison sentence would range from 5 to 6 years. The young lady thought for a moment, as she knew that this was around the time of her debut. She knew that, before her reincarnation, it was at this age that she had driven away her uncle. She thought that fate was laughing at her. The young lady wondered why she had been reborn, and it still took her time to get rid of him. She wondered if she couldn't cope without the Duke's help. She was very tired. She knew that even if she used everything she had prepared, she would only come a little closer to deceiving her uncle. But at least it should be enough to deprive him of guardianship. She understood that he was confident that he was getting the maximum possible sentence of several years. She knew that he was sure that she would not be able to get the Duke's help. Antonia thought that perhaps he knew something that she did not know. She was furious, and everything infuriated her. She sighed heavily and asked him if he really meant to say that her uncle had not committed serious crimes compared to Mr. Burton. He looked at her and said that it seemed to him that it was more important now to reset her mother's difficult situation. The young lady looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. Croft looked closely at the young lady and asked why she thought her hands were tied now. The young lady sighed heavily and said that, of course, it was because of her guardianship document. He looked at her closely and said that this was true, and for some reason she did not agree to this guardianship 2 years ago. He said that this agreement could not be terminated before she came of age without the consent of both parties, or good cause for that. The young lady was puzzled, but looked at him, as he spoke very proudly about what she already knew, especially when he used difficult words. The young lady realized that her suspicions were confirmed. She looked at him intently and asked if he really meant that other people would also use this weak point. He said that this was the case, since even if Mr. Burton used children, Mr. Sergi could skillfully use it. The young lady looked at him intently but did not answer. Croft looked at the young lady and said that, as she should have realized by now, he could not do anything to the Duke. The young lady sighed heavily, for she knew this. She thought that perhaps this was why, unlike Farmas, he had held out until she came of age, until he was accused by the Duke. The young lady understood that she didn't need to be too upset now, since she thought that everything could still work out. Past life, she was still hoping for a miracle, so she was never able to spread her wings. She unfolded the document and saw that it contained the information she had asked for. She knew that everything would change if she could win 5 or 6 years. She knew that if her uncle went to prison, she could get rid of his guardianship. She was sure that he would pursue her when he was freed, but Antonia, in turn, understood that she had to do at least something for herself. She understood that, whatever the case, given her debut, It was better than being deceived by her uncle. Antonia looked at him intently and asked if he could recommend anything to her. From everything that was listed, he looked at her intently and said that if they wanted to bake him in prison for this exact period, then they had only one option. The young lady looked at him in surprise, and a moment later, she asked if he meant the temple. He said that now Mr. Paul is offering the temple several options that can bring him profit. Thus, he wants to strengthen his position as the Earl. He said that the temple is not a place where Mr. can correct his shortcomings. He said that although most people believed that the Mr. would be useful to them, this was not everyone's opinion. The young lady understood that, in other words, there would be those who could bring her uncle to court. The young lady looked at the young man with a keen gaze and asked what he wanted as payment for this information. He smiled and said that she was still as insightful as they said about her. He said that he did not want anything special. He smiled and said he just wanted her to help him when he needed it. She looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. She understood that this was the most dangerous deal. Antonia looked at him intently and said that they needed to decide something first. He looked at her in surprise. The young lady said that it seemed like their conversation had dragged on. She said that he shouldn't pretend, as she felt that he was uncomfortable. In turn, she knew that this was some kind of test, whether she could find out his true nature. If she was right, he had been a very ambitious man before her return, and that was one of the reasons why her county was mired in debt, even though she was a young aristocrat, but still the heiress to vast territories in the East. She thought that after some time everything would be different, but now he was just the head of a guild that helps solve love problems in families like hers. He smiled, looking at the young lady, and said that after all, Madame was right and her eyes were very sharp. The young lady looked intently at the young man. She realized that he had not understood her hint. Before her reincarnation, he was famous for his skills throughout the capital. She looked at him sharply and said that was not what she meant at all. He looked at her in surprise and asked what she was talking about. She said he was about the same age as her. He stood there in surprise, not knowing what to answer. Antonia knew that he had become famous in the capital when he was only 20 years old, and it had become a hot topic of conversation, so she had two hypotheses. She assumed that either he was Rufus's son from the past, or he had a brother with whom he shared the same name. And another hypothesis was that he was just pretending to be an adult, the way he spoke quickly, patterns and mannerisms. It didn't seem like he was used to using all those highbrow words. She knew that if he were an adult, he would hardly have used her as an assistant. She knew that it would have been much easier to find a less problematic aristocrat. And although he tried to cover it all up with idle curiosity, it gave him away. The young man looked at the young lady with a puzzled expression and asked what she was talking about, as he thought it was just nonsense on her part. She looked at him intently and calmly said that he already knew what she was talking about, so it was just nonsense, and also asked how he could be the same age as her. The young lady looked at him intently. She remained calm, but his temper gave him away. A moment later, she said that if he insisted so much, there was nothing she could do. She looked at him intently and stood up, saying that she thought they would end it there and there would be no deal between them. The young man froze in bewilderment. He looked at her intently and asked what she was talking about, since he did not expect such a thing at all. The young lady, in turn, saw that he was in too much of a hurry. She understood that if he were more experienced, he would have found an elegant way out of this situation. She looked at him intently and asked what the point of further conversation was. She said that if a relationship is built on lies, it will not bring her what she wants. The young man was shocked and did not understand how this happened. He looked at her in surprise and asked how she guessed. She looked at him intently and said that it was very clumsy of him. The young man looked at her in surprise and asked what she was talking about. She said that his behavior when he greeted people by the back, when he was sitting, made it seem like he was younger than he wanted to appear. The young man sighed heavily and said that Madame had said that he was doing very well. The young lady now realized that apparently Madame had helped her very well here too. Antonia understood that Madame considered her to be a difficult 12-year-old girl who knew absolutely nothing. She treated her rather as a girl who was soon to make her debut. The young lady understood that such suspicions did not frighten her, because there were children who were slightly ahead of their peers in development. But no matter how much she thought about it, she understood that she could not allow herself to behave like an ordinary child. Therefore, Madame expected that she would notice awkwardness in the young man's behavior. The young man sighed heavily. A moment later, the young lady saw that there was a little boy in front of her. She looked at him in surprise and asked if he was really only 9 years old. He said angrily that he would actually be 12 years old next year. Now it was obvious to her that he was a baby, and her suspicions were not unfounded. Antonia knew that when he grew up, there would be a lot of crazy people who would love him to the point of madness. But while she saw only a boy in front of her, she looked at him intently and said that he was still younger than her. The young man said with fury that he was only 1 year younger. The young man was shocked and did not understand at what point everything went wrong. The young lady, in turn, noticed that his hair looked like cotton candy. She looked at him intently and asked why he decided to test others. She asked if he really wanted to say that he does not make long-term deals with fools. He silently looked away and did not answer. The young lady, in turn, realized that she was right. One of the reasons he chose her was her age, because even if he was caught, it would not be difficult to find a common language. He looked at her in surprise and said that he had never met a child smarter than him. He asked how she could figure everything out. She looked at him and calmly said that he was not thinking broadly. Or maybe he really was a little younger than her and was again trying to add a few years to his age. The young man looked at her intently and said that this was not so, since he would indeed be 12 years old next year. She looked at him closely and thought with a smile that he looked like a younger brother when he was so cutely angry. Now she understood that they could talk about what Madame asked her about. She looked at him intently and asked if they could talk about the deal now.